play with them. We paint tiny people, then we play with them.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Miniatures Monthly at the Crate and Crowbar. My name is Chris Thurston and I'm joined by Tom Senior.
Hello.
Hello, we're back again.
Done it.
Again.
We're doing it again.
It's the end of March-ish. And it's been fucking ages.
Oh my god, so much stuff has happened, Chris.
I know. So we, the first episode of this, spin-off pod we recorded quite a while ago, like quite a long time before it even went up, because we were, experimenting the format, figuring out what we were going to do with it, trying to figure out what it was even going to be called. And so we, we went through the process, we recorded it, and then we worked on it, and then it went up. But the net result of that is that we've had a probably unprecedented break between the last time we did that.
Yes.
And
probably
now.
About 6 weeks. Maybe.
Yeah. More than that, I think. I think it might even be closer to 2 months.
Wow.
Which is kind of nuts.
And then Games Workshop, in the 2-month interim, decided to announce so much stuff.
Loads of stuff, across the board, really. So,
yeah, great.
So we figured as we gingerly step closer and closer to having an actual structure for this podcast, that we would start off this episode, and indeed probably quite a lot of future episodes, with a bit of news.
Not just a bit of news.
Quite a lot of news.
It's going to be the biggest news section
ever. Well, until
since
next
the
month,
beginning of
presumably.
the podcast.
Yeah, indeed. Episode 2, just breaking boundaries.
Absolutely. That's what we do.
Yeah. So, and so this will be probably quite a lot of AOS news and AOS Age of Sigmar related news, but actually not just limited to that, because it seems to be news all over in Games Workshop land.
Yeah, where should we start?
Where we should start is something that now feels like old news, which is the fact that, so since we last met, your faction in Age of Sigmar, Tom, Stormcast Eternals, have had an entire book and an entire sub-faction.
They have. They've had the rules update, and they've got a new chamber, the Vanguard Chamber, who are basically just kind of rogues who live out in the wilderness, and they've been out in the mortal realms for decades, maybe centuries. They're actually kind of properly bedded into the universe now. The Stormcast have left Azir, they've left this sanctuary where they've been for hundreds of years, and they're actually starting to change based on the realms they encounter.
Yeah.
And the Vanguard are a reflection of that, because they're actually just they've gone native. Basically.
They're the least pristine of the shiny golden men from space.
They are. They're all scratched up. Some of them apparently have just started daubing war paint on them, on their armor and stuff like that. They're wearing animals they've killed. And so they're properly, they don't even answer to summons in Azir. Like, it's part of the fluff that you read in the new book is that they're not expected to turn up when Sigmar says, we need to meet and discuss stuff, because they're just expected to always be in the realms, just kind of scoping things out, launching these kind of hit and run attacks, and basically serving as the intelligence services for Sigmar's crusade. And
they're the first sort of this and the new version of Warhammer Quest, which is called Shadows over Hammerhall. Is Shadows at Hammerhall? I think so.
Hammerhall is the city.
Yeah. Which is, it's a reference to Shadows over Innsmouth from Lovecraft, I believe.
Of course.
That these two things have been like the first glimpse at the way that the Order faction, which is broadly like the good guys faction in Age of Sigmar, has changed. Because one of the things we talked about last month is the way that they rolled out this completely new fiction, and that it was incredibly abstract when that fiction started. Because it was this sort of, highly, sort of high fantasy force of good returning to a world that had become entirely high fantasy evil. And they've been quite explicit now that obviously Age of Sigmar has been around for about 2 years, but the fiction has moved on like several lifetimes. Several generations have passed. There are cities now. Those Stormcast Eternals who've been around a long time have now been around long enough to have these like Vanguard chambers that are living wild out in the wilderness, riding chocobos.
Yeah, the chocobos, the birds. Everything's about birds in Age of Sigmar now.
Yeah, everything's about birds,
this year, because of course each have had their Lord of Change, who's just a big old bird.
Yeah, Zangor, Birdmen.
Birdmen.
Ripped Birdmen.
And not to be outdone, the Stormcast have befriended chocobos in the wilderness and now ride them into battle. And they're incredibly fast, and they can kind of phase out of existence and travel across the entire length of a battlefield in the blink of an eye, and then strike unawares from strange angles.
This also was the other thing I guess we're seeing is like, it was interesting. Like, I think maybe a lot of people expected the next battle tome, which is essentially what codexes kind of are in other contexts, right? Like, they're not mandatory because all the rules are free anyway, but they add a bunch of stuff. People might have been expecting a faction other than Stormcast, given that Stormcast is the poster faction, but this is also sort of a rebalancing of Stormcast that reins a lot of stuff in as well.
Definitely. They've done a really good job with the new rule book of, codifying what the Stormcast whole deal is in a much more balanced and, reasonable way. So the idea is that Stormcast can, ride lightning bolts down to the battlefield, and Sigmar could throw them out of Azir and they could just sort of teleport down. And that used to be a function of battalions, where these are basically formations where if you have the correct combination of units, they gain special powers. And a lot of these were very, very powerful. So you could send your flying guys into the middle of a battle, and within a range of them you could put down a couple of units, and it was like a guaranteed thing. And some of that still exists, but that has been turned into just a general rule for the Stormcast now, where every turn you can put at the start of the battle you could put any number of units into the Celestial Realm, and every turn you have to roll for them, and on a 3+ they come down. And now it's just a part of their whole deal. It's not even a thing you don't have to buy a certain number of units or arrange your army in a certain way. It's just a thing that the Stormcast can do, because that's just their whole thing. Yeah.
It feels like, one thing that's interesting about it is it feels like the rule set is maturing live without something big like an edition change or something like that. It feels like maybe Age of Sigmar won't get Age of Sigmar 2nd edition, but it will keep just, more like a video game, more like the kind of stuff that we're used to. This felt like a patch for the Stormcast is the way I would put it.
Yeah, and if they release one of these every year, and also kind of opened another chamber, which they've set themselves lots of scope to do, that there's chambers they mentioned, like the Ruination Chamber, which is yet to open. So that it seems like it's going to be like an annual release for the Stormcast.
The one that gets me is the Logister Chamber, who I presume are the accountants.
Yeah, they're just there with giant kind of scrolls,
ledgers.
See what they could do on the battlefield.
But yeah, so it feels like they're sort of, because there were battle tomes before this and Disciples of Tzeentch, which is the one that came out in January for my particular faction of bird dudes. They've sort of set this balance of a whole bunch of new fiction, and not just fiction in the sort of traditional story plot development sense, but more broadly like world building, like maps, like the Stormcast. Like I found myself, I bought the Stormcast Eternals battle tome, even though I don't have a Stormcast army, because I want the maps and the fiction and the art and that stuff.
Yeah.
And because it feels like just the latest edition, part of the game. They're sort of set this template now for what a battle tome means, which feels very kind of year 2. It feels like the sort of those tentative first steps of the first year of the game have kind of passed, and they're now established like a template that could easily be built on. And like you say, the best example of that is the fact that the latest battle tome gives you a diagram of how the Stormcast Eternals are laid out as an organizational structure.
Yeah.
And in addition to the Extremis Chamber and the Vanguard Chamber, which were last year's and this year's chambers respectively, there's this big list of closed chambers, which feels like them saying, we have 3 more years of this, and you can look forward to discovering what the Logister Chamber is.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. I think I worry that the Stormcast Eternals get that sort of attention and other factions don't necessarily. So I think I've been very lucky for buying into the sort of poster army for the game, because they well supported in a way that if I was collecting, Tzeentch have done well, but
Seraphon, maybe.
Seraphon,
Old Lizard Men.
Stuff that isn't on the box, basically. Like, I think you're always going to be well served if you've got a Khorne army, if you've got a Stormcast army. But if I was collecting Death, the Death faction has been really kind of untended to since the start of Age of Sigmar.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's definitely a concern. Obviously it's one of the weaknesses of this growth model for a game, which has affected Warhammer since the dawn of time, which is that, there aren't, I think in a different context, or in the context that maybe we come from, like in video games, you'd have different teams working on different factions, kind of developing those things. Whereas actually it is a team building the new stuff for Age of Sigmar, and it progresses faction by faction.
Yeah.
And it is eventually your turn. Like, Tzeentch just had their turn. And I fully anticipate that we won't see new Tzeentch stuff at any scale for years.
Yeah,
like
definitely.
it's done, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, that brings us on to, so the other thing they announced, and I think maybe this surprised people, is the next battle tome is called Blades of Khorne, which is going to be for Khorne what Disciples of Tzeentch was for Tzeentch, and what Stormcast Eternals was for the Stormcast, which is no new units, just a new book that ties all the existing stuff together with loads of new rules. Like, you know, one of the things that you just got, and we played with it today, is the fact that Stormcast get loads of new prayers and sort of abilities to wrap around existing units. Khorne's getting a very similar thing. And I'm actually pretty excited about that because, you know, like I mentioned last week, I've got the Khorne side project on the go, thanks to, you know, I left my day job in the last month, and kind leaving gift was a start collecting Khorne box. So I've got that waiting for me when my current big pile of Birdmen are done.
Yeah.
So it's kind of exciting to know that that's on the horizon. But again, that's another sort of feels like a consolidation of the rules and the fiction for a faction that is on the box for the start. You know, Khorne and Stormcast are the two poster factions for Age of Sigmar.
Absolutely.
And that kind of slow machine of Games Workshop's rule development has now just sort of gone back over to pick up the loose ends on the factions that they'd already established much better than anyone else.
Yeah.
And it might take a little bit longer to get onto the next thing.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. Though I'm really happy about the Khorne book as well, because I'm really happy for them to release books without releasing models. If that kind of brings models that exist in the range back into kind of contention, back into consideration, which is what the Khorne thing, they've explicitly said, we don't need any new Khorne models because there are loads of Khorne models. They're great. That range is awesome. So it's just about giving them new ways to play on the battlefield, giving you new reasons to buy units that perhaps weren't that interesting before. So and also like the production that is going to go into making a book is just a different scale to producing a model range. So the idea, I don't feel as though they're taking away from any other factions by doing a Khorne book like this. And I think it's, the books are so good now and they're getting better and better that, one of the things I'd like to see them do is more actual just narrative in the books, like a page of like a short story, which is what they used to do way back in the Warhammer Fantasy days. Yeah. But apart from that, I think they're just really comprehensive. They address every aspect of the game, no matter how you want to play it, whether you want to do it competitively or whether you want to play it narratively, as we tend to. So that I really feel like they were in their stride and they kind of know what Age of Sigmar is now, and they're just fleshing it out. It's great.
It's interesting. So a lot of the most recent 40k stuff does, like all the Gathering Storm stuff that is happening on that side of the hobby, does have story, right? It has plot and named characters that are kind of not just archetypal, but are, you know, having some impact on the world in which everyone's games take place. Age of Sigmar, like, I agree with you that it would be nice to see some more specific storylines in most of those battle tomes, but I do wonder if the decision to not include that in favor of maps and broader world building stuff is deliberate. Yeah. Because it feels like, so one thing that hasn't happened yet is nothing has happened in the fiction that contradicts anything that we're doing, right? Yeah. And I wonder if maybe that's the direction they're taking with AOS, is that it's going to be more about world building and just leaving it a bit open.
Yeah, maybe the rule is like every page has to give you a tool with which you can kind of add to your own hobby, rather than introducing stuff that might in any way shut down stuff that you're trying to do with your stories. But at the same time, excuse me, at the same time, I think what I enjoyed most about those little story bits is that it doesn't have to be about Karl Franz killing a named character. My favourite ones were just like, here's a page of quite small text italics about a Way Watcher and what they do in their day-to-day life. Just that kind of the stuff that really gives you an avenue into your characters, a way for you to kind of understand the world a little bit more.
So one thing that's interesting, having both books, there's more of that in Disciples of Tzeentch than there is in the Stormcast book. Right. And I wonder if that's partly because the Stormcast book consolidates a lot of narrative that has already been in Black Library novels and the books. Like, the Stormcast have been the heroes of almost every Age of Sigmar book to date, whereas there's maybe one or two books that deal with Chaos Champions at all, and they're some of my favorite stuff. Yeah. Like, the Disciples of Tzeentch book does have exactly what you're talking about, like those italiced out blocks of text that tell the story of, like, one of them's about, what it looks like, what it feels like when an Arcanite cult rises up within a town, and all of these people suddenly gain their kind of like glamour forms where everyone's suddenly a ripped Birdman, because that is the end goal of any cult. But like, you know, they do that experiential thing, but maybe like a lot of the Stormcast book spends time catching you up with like the Realmgate Wars, which, you know,
which they have to do as well, I suppose.
Yeah. So maybe, you know, it'll be interesting to see how the Corn book handles it, because it feels like we've got a couple of, in order to determine what the direction is, we need to wait a couple of books, right, to see what the common theme is. Because maybe Stormcast are the exception in that they don't need that fiction because there's already been so much of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be very interesting to kind of look at clues as to where the universe is going from here, because, they've also announced another new faction for Order.
Long awaited, always referred to on forums as the Steamhead Duardin. They're actually Lords of Caradron? Caradron Overlords.
Caradron, nearly. I almost got
You
it.
almost did. You almost got there.
I got the Caradron part. That was the part I was sure I was going to get wrong. And these are the new, they're mad, kind of astronaut dwarfs.
Steampunk whaling astronaut space dwarfs.
Yes, they have their dwarven suits of armor, and we'll get onto this. But some of that armor is hilarious. They've got steamships, they've got harpoon guns, they've got suits that they, you know, are pressurized, that they never.
Yeah, they've got zeppelins.
They've
got
cool.
balloon-based jetpacks.
They do have balloon, probably the weakest part of the range, I would say, from the initial reveal.
So, I mean, I remember sending you this when they announced it, because everyone thought this was coming, because this was one of the rumors.
Absolutely.
That, the other form of, because we would have the Fire Slayers, which are naked, angry dwarves with, like gold burnished tattoos.
Yeah, they hammer runes, magic runes into their own skin, and smolder as they run
which was sort
to battle.
of, given that Age of Sigmar has basically taken the old fantasy setting and taken every element of it and made the most extreme high fantasy version of that thing.
Yes.
So Fire Slayers are what Slayers became.
Right.
Slayers used to just be topless dwarves that ran at people and screamed a lot. Now they are hammering, they're basically 50% magma and are hammering golden ingots into their own flesh and can tunnel through the earth.
And they've befriended loads of lizards.
And ride salamanders. Right? Like I love all this stuff because I really like the kind of how silly Age of Sigmar is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The Caradron Overlords take the aspect of the old dwarf factions, which was all about engineering and, you know, Gatling guns and that kind of thing, and twists that into pressurized dwarven exosuits with golden beards.
Yeah.
And balloon jump packs and zeppelins.
It's the best, well, the funniest model of the range they've showed so far is like one of those balloon guys. He's been in a kind of mech suit and he's hovering above the earth on a little balloon, quite a small balloon. It looks quite silly. And his helmet not only has like an armored beard, it has like an armored top hat.
Yeah.
Like he's modelled the whole thing.
I remember like, and the top hat has a cannon.
Is it?
Yeah.
Really?
There's a cannon between the beard and the top hat.
Oh my God.
It's not clear whether the cannon is attached to the balloon or the top hat.
Okay.
But like that was the one where I was like, is this silly?
Is this too much?
Yeah, exactly. Is this Age of Sigmar but too much?
Yeah. I mean, Age of Sigmar just seems to be like pushing further and further into that territory. And I'm kind of delighted by it really because they're fucking committed to this road now.
It feels like, yeah, like, you know, they upset old school fans by moving so far away from the kind of low fantasy medieval battle theme of the original, even though there were obviously elements of old Warhammer Fantasy Battle that were miles away from just Holy Roman Empire era medieval, you know, not medieval, but like early modern warfare with guns and things, but nonetheless, to full on like, how do we make everything as insane as it can possibly be? I mean, at this point, if they ever redo Bretonnians, one of the deprecated factions, it basically has to be Imperial Knights from 40k, right? Because Imperial Knights are space Bretonnians, because they are, you know, questing knights that happen to ride around in 60-foot mech suits, which is at this point where that would also end up in Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
But yeah, so like, I'm kind of all for it, partly because like, I think one of the good things about it, so there's a cynical aspect of it, or at least a business-minded aspect of it, is Age of Sigmar marks, and we spoke about this a little bit last time, like, Tolkien being absolutely left behind in how a fantasy world is conceived. And there are very strong business reasons to do that, because ultimately, it's a little bit weird that there are so many beloved fantasy series that are so vastly indebted to one piece of fiction.
Yeah.
From Warhammer, traditional Warhammer to Warcraft, everything Blizzard do with that. Like, there's so much stuff that wouldn't exist in the form that it exists in if Tolkien hadn't written those stories. And it feels like Games Workshop have gone through each of those ideas and gone, how do we make this 100% ours? And that also leads to dwarves with jetpacks.
On balloons.
Yeah.
I'm not such a fan of the balloon dwarves, because they do look quite silly, but the rest of it looks great to me. I really like the idea of the airships. I'm really excited to see what the rules will be for those as well, because they're quite different to anything else. They remind me a bit of, like Dark Eldar skimmers, where they, I wonder if how they'll operate, whether they'll have any similarities with that stuff.
There's an interesting, so there are now 3 different types of magic gold in Age of Sigmar.
Urgold, Sigmarite, and whatever the hell
Ether
they use.
gold.
Ether gold, is that what it's called?
So this month has all been about adding the word ether to stuff.
Right. Ether wings.
Ether wings.
Stormcast.
Riding the wings etheric.
Yeah, of course.
Yep. So ether gold is like gold but air, whereas Urgold is like gold but double gold.
Double gold. Nice.
And so that's the thing propelling all of these dwarven airships. They're full of magic gold air.
Oh, interesting.
Which is, I mean, if you were going Tolkien but opposite land, then that's how you get there.
Yeah, of course. Going from mining underground to airships.
Yeah.
It's a cool thing. I'm excited about that. I think it paves the way for increasingly batshit releases, which is what I'm
well, it ties into one of the other rumours, which is, and it's hinted at in one of the pieces of character art that's already been shown, is that the future of, sort of one of the elven factions, like the Dark Elf faction, is going to be to pull more towards like the kind of Corsairs and seafaring angle.
That's awesome.
Because, like Shadows over Hammerhall, Shadows under Hammerhall, it's one of the two, includes 2 heroes that felt like they presaged this year's stuff, right? Because it has the Cogsmith, which is an old dwarven hero model, but has a new context, because he's a dwarf with a Gatling gun, shotgun thing, and a, metal visor. Very Carriage and Overlords themed. It also has the Black Ark Fleetmaster, which is a kind of dark elf pirate. And that's the rumored direction that they're going to take that faction in, which is going to be towards kind of like Cthulhu cultist, Kraken themes and stuff like that. And that seems like it might pair nicely with, there's an element of the Carriage and Overlords, which is all about these kind of like whaling ships with harpoons and things like that. And so if it ends up as magic sky dwarves versus Lovecraft
Corsair
elves,
sailors. That's fucking awesome, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's
it's
so
great.
Good. That's so good.
So that kind of brings us on to the next thing that they've announced this week at Adepticon, which is the kind of board games miniatures thing in Chicago, which is Shadespire.
Yes.
Which is, or to give it its full name, Warhammer Underworlds Shadespire.
Which suggests there's going to be like a series of this. Like
Underworlds games.
Yes.
Which is sort of a new, competitive miniatures game based in the Age of Sigmar setting, but with its own specific rule set designed for organized play, which is the term used for sort of what happens in the X-Wing community, for example. So like regular structured tournaments that can be played out in a day. So it's designed for sort of 40-minute sessions and so on. It's a sort of small scale skirmish game, on a hex-based grid for, teams of like 3 to 5 models. So like really small scale. The reason it's sort of linked to the stuff we were just talking about is because the Shadespire setting is I think the first time they've shown anything of the realms of light and shadow.
Right.
Because it's supposed to be a sort of a realm or like a sub-realm, mini-realm.
I thought it was a death thing.
It is.
Ah, okay.
But it's also not, it's not Realm of Death. That's the thing. It's death, but not Realm of Death.
Yeah.
It's a city that Nagash, the god of the dead, owns, I guess, has a small holding in. Yeah. That is located between the realms of light and shadow.
Okay, interesting.
So it's all about mirrors and death and shades and stuff. But
those are the 2 realms that we've seen nothing of so far.
Absolutely. Which is hence the link to the elves, because everyone's assuming that the elves will be tied to the realms of light and shadow.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a Nagash sort of theme and therefore a death theme. But the factions that they've revealed for it so far are Stormcast and Khorne, so back to pretty AOS standard stuff.
Yeah.
But I am real into this. I am totally on board for Because what it shows, I think, is that Games Workshop have noted that Fantasy Flight, who make X-Wing and Armada and Imperial Assault and Netrunner and a lot of other games, have had tremendous success with basically this format. Like, they don't have a skirmish game of quite this kind, but, Games Workshop tends to make sprawling tabletop war games with a vast hobby investment, not small scale games that make for good tournament play. I mean, obviously, Age of Sigmar and 40k tournaments are a thing, but the infrastructure required to support them is vastly in excess of what's needed to support X-Wing.
Yeah.
Or something like that. And so this is Games Workshop entering that space, but also a really specific kind of game design that I find really exciting. So it's hex-based strategy with a deck building aspect where you draw a hand of cards that factor into abilities, and a sort of objective scoring system where you attempt to score objectives in a given round in order to win. And then every game is designed to take place within the span of 40 minutes as a best of 3. So you play 3 games in that time. And the thing I'm really into about this is it answers a few of the things that I've had a problem with in X-Wing recently. We can maybe talk about this at a different time. But I feel like objectives are a really good way of ensuring that you can have a meaningful diversity of different types of usefulness in any small scale game. Without objectives, damage output becomes the defining factor of a war game, I think. But also having, both a card based element, but also the way the dice work is all custom dice. It's not numbered dice. It's all designed to kind of borrow something from X-Wing, which is that there's a degree of randomness in what can happen. But a lot of the game is going to be about creating situations where the dice are more likely to go your way based on sort of strategic positioning and that kind of thing.
Right.
So I'm genuinely properly excited about it at this point.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And they've already said that they're going to plug in there's going to be loads of factions for it, basically. And I can't wait to see, first of all, it's going to be a good opportunity for them to potentially do some new death models. And to clarify, actually, the models are, I think they're snap fit and pre-coloured on the plastic. So the 2 factions, the Stormcast and the Khorne plastic sprues are red and sort of yellow, respectively.
Blue.
Either blue and blue. Yeah. So the idea is that you just pop them out, glue them together, or even just put them together, dry fit them, and you could just play straight away. But still, the models are still great. So they're really dynamic, and if you want to, you can paint them. So it's the most accessible, even though it's like a competitive play thing, it seems like a very accessible entry point for people who like.
Yeah, they did the same thing with the most recent edition of Blood Bowl, which came out last year, where it was all snap fit models that were either red or blue.
Right.
Which feels about as close as Games Workshop are going to get to pre-painted models.
Yeah.
Because that's what Fantasy Flight do, where everything's pre-painted and pre-assembled. But, I think that's a really good move for them generally, but also just moving into an area where it's more about buying expansions for a game that is like a living card game rather than about building out an army based on your own kind of whims, which is the hobby side of it. And both systems have strengths, but it's really nice to see GW move in that direction. The other big thing about Shadespire is it's the first time they've shown a female Stormcast.
It is, yeah. That's one of the 3 Stormcast models they've got in their set, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is nice.
Yeah, she's just a female Liberator Prime, basically, and very easy to swap out, I imagine, for a Liberator Prime in an existing unit if you wanted to do that.
Absolutely, yeah. There's loads of potential there for,
yeah,
definitely.
And I think they've just about gotten it right as well, because this is a subject that I've kind of cared about for a while, because I think it probably might have been a picture of this with the last episode, but my character in our Silver Tower, Warhammer Quest Silver Tower campaign is a Night Quester, Stormcast Night Quester, and a female Stormcast Night Quester, because I just did a very, very basic conversion that involved swapping out the helmet for a bear head from a third party sort of miniatures bits maker with a collar made out of green stuff. But I felt that you could make a good looking female Stormcast model just by swapping the heads out, because the body shapes, like the Stormcast armor is so huge and so abstract that you could really fit anybody in there, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like you didn't need Sisters of Battle style sort of armor, boob, corset, plate.
No.
And so one of the things that like the the new female Stormcast is more feminine than a masculine Stormcast, and there's an element of boob plate, but actually it's a lot more in line with the rest of the range than, for example, Sisters of Battle versus Space Marines. And I'm really glad that they moved in that direction, because I was worried with how they might take it. Yeah.
Oh, it seems like they're always going to do it at some point. I'm also glad that there isn't just, they haven't just said, oh, here are the female units. Like, they haven't said, they haven't done a Sisters of Science where the only way you can have women in the Stormcast army is to have the dedicated unit of women. They've actually gone for Urshi's Liberator. Like, any Stormcast could be anyone, really. Yeah. Sigmar picks everyone from the realms based on their hatred of chaos and nothing more.
Which was already in the fiction.
Yes.
And actually is more explicitly the case in the latest book, which we were just talking about, right? Like, the new book is even, like, I wonder if they've noticed that there's demand for this. Because traditionally I feel like, people love the Sisters of Battle range now, but when it came out, it was famously unsuccessful.
Didn't very well. Yeah.
So, maybe they were a bit, from a pure business sense, a bit shy about having, diverse armies in that particular way. But it feels like now they've sort of seen that there's demand for this, that the sort of, the landscape of hobby stuff has changed, and that, being able, like, one of the nice things about the way the Stormcast are designed is the armor is so abstract that even though the bodies are kind of physically masculine, there's really no saying who's inside those bodies anyway, that armor anyway, because the armor's so big.
Yeah.
That, just the scale of it in terms of like size of the helmets relative to the bodies means that any normal proportioned human being, even a big muscular person, has to be much smaller than their armor they're in. So, you can already say, if you decide that your liberators are, there's a whole bunch, there's female and male liberators in your unit, you can basically already do that.
That's true.
But having these kind of specific models is also kind of helpful. Yeah. So it's just a cool thing they're doing.
It's cool. And it's really dynamic pose on her as well. Like, it's really, it looks great. In fact, all the models in that Shadespire box, I want to paint them, all of them.
Yeah.
But the Stormcast are great because I know I'll be able to take those models and put them in my army. I could use the main kind of champion who's the guy in the box, basically would be a really good kind of Night Quester.
Yeah.
Replacement.
Or an, Errant Quester.
Or Errant Quester, yeah. So, I mean, the possibilities there for it to feed back into the main, army hobby is good.
And we're just really excited about having that format for play as well, because while, like, I really enjoy playing Age of Sigmar, the time investment required and the space required, including scenery and other things, it's always an investment to get going. It's something we have to really plan. Whereas in the other half of my kind of hobby life, I can go to a club once a week and play 3 games of X-Wing.
Right.
Which is something you absolutely can't do.
No.
In almost any way that we currently play. Even Silver Tower, which is a dungeon crawler, co-op dungeon crawler, takes setting up and an evening for us to have a proper session.
Yeah.
Whereas the idea is like, if we both pick up Shadespire sets and we can use some of our existing models, or even, the models are useful in our other hobby, that's something we can get a game in an hour before doing something else, then that's,
it's great.
Genuinely appealing. Also, like, I love systems that are about, managing a certain amount of randomness alongside a lot of sort of strategic decision making, which is what makes X-Wing so good. There's a lot of that in Age of Sigmar, but Age of Sigmar is just a lot more complicated. And so the idea of having it be a little bit more, stripped down to kind of traditional kind of, units on a hex grid type strategic decision making is really appealing. Like, one of the examples of how that works in the game is, but you have attack and defense dice, but attack dice and defense dice both have an icon on them that means basically like an assist. So if your character has another character near them, assists count as successes, otherwise they're failures.
Right.
So like one of the mechanics, so essentially, the odds of getting a successful roll are higher based on the formation that you're moving your characters around in.
Interesting.
But that plays off against the need to split up to capture objectives and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And those are just the fundamental building blocks of an interesting strategic system.
Yeah, you can already see that, a Stormcast, warband with 3 characters versus a Khorne one with 5 or 6. Like, again, they're going to be, you immediately see that Khorne are going to be good objective cappers, but not necessarily strong in combat. And
yeah.
You can already see the asymmetry playing out there in interesting ways.
Yeah. So I'm genuinely like, it's very like, I don't know how or when we're going to see more from that, because it feels like it's a while off still.
Yeah, it seems, they were playing it, when they when they showed it the first time, I think people who were there were able to just sit down and play a game of it. So it exists, but they suggested later this year. So
one of the interesting things is as well, they specified that it was a product of the core design team at Games Workshop, not the standalone games design team that make things like Blood Bowl, I believe, and like the Horus Heresy games and that kind of thing. So they're obviously taking this quite seriously, and that's not a surprise because, one of the surprising things about miniatures gaming generally over the last couple of years has been that X-Wing is now the biggest miniatures game in the world, which is kind of nuts. Given the run up that Warhammer had, to be toppled by something that's only been around for 4 years is, so I think they've obviously seen the need to move into this particular territory. But, it'd be great. It'd be great to see if it could bridge that gap with, like, all the people, like, so I'm part of a big community of X-Wing players in Bristol, but nobody plays any Warhammer game. Apart from me, really. A couple of people play Blood Bowl. But again, it's in that category, right? Yeah. And I think Shadespire is probably best understood as, like, weirdly, given that Blood Bowl is fighting but football, Shadespire looks like it's shaping up to be football but fighting, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's it moves back towards the core fantasy of that setting, but with a much more rigid set of rules. Not unlike something like Mordheim or Necromunda, where it's still just a stripped down version of that. Yeah. Higher level war game.
Yeah, really excited about it. It's going to be great. And nice surprise as well.
Yeah, genuinely. Yeah, so I'm properly excited for that. Because I needed more projects.
Don't we all?
So the other thing that's come out of Adepticon is, and we did say this was going to be a big news section, it's the first inklings of what 40K's next edition is going to be like. And that's real interesting because I think they probably predict a riot if they say, we're going to take loads of lessons from Age of Sigmar. Yeah. But they're taking loads of lessons from Age of Sigmar.
They did a very good, a funny video where they implied that they were going to move to square bases for Warhammer 40,000.
Which is hilarious, but possibly too soon for some people.
Too soon, yeah. No, this is really exciting. They're talking about 3 ways to play, which is the narrative open and, match play is what they're referred to in Age of Sigmar, which is basically how competitive you want to be, how kind of story focused you want to be. And they're going to put that into Warhammer 40k, which is great because that universe is fucking awesome. And the stuff they're doing story-wise with that universe right now is crazy interesting and really exciting.
I want to play narrative play 40k, really.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. They've just brought back one of the Primarchs, one of the Emperor's children.
Robot
Gulliman, yeah. Slight diversion here, but playing Mass Effect, I've called my rider Reboot Rider.
Really?
Yeah.
Isn't it Reboote?
Reboote Rider.
I don't know how you pronounce Reboot.
No.
Robert?
Let's say Robot.
Yeah.
I like Robot. He's back, he's got a model, and he's woken up, he's thawed, however it happened, and he's looked at the Imperium and gone, what the fuck happened to this,
exactly.
To this civilization? Because when I was around with my dad, the Emperor, we had like an actual utopian vision for how humanity was going to play out, and it did not involve dreadnoughts and just, endless kill squadrons, destroying, entire planets. Just,
It's funny what happens, isn't it?
Yeah. You walk out for 10,000 years, come back and everything's on fire.
Yeah. It's a lot like the episode of Community.
Yeah, the Meow Beans one.
The Chaos Theory one. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, it's really exciting. And they've brought back some of the coolest characters in that fiction, like Cypher is just one, badass idea.
Random fact, my first ever online video games handle was Cypher because I loved Cypher the Dark Angel so much.
That's awesome, yeah.
It's not awesome.
Well, I mean,
it was 2001.
Within a certain context.
Yeah.
Within a given context. So yeah, the Warhammer 40,000 universe is brilliant. And the races are so interesting. Like the Eldar are really interesting to me.
Eldari now.
Of course, they've changed.
The de-Tolkienization. Eldar is a Tolkien word again.
Ah, right,
so
yeah.
It's one of those things. So yeah.
But they're kind of all death wizards now.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're all death wizards now.
Yeah, just the Tau and the Orcs, those factions are brilliant. And the idea of actually using the system to tell stories rather than play out kind of super hardcore simulation. What if this weapon, would this penetrate the armor of this type of tank if it was fired at a certain angle? That sort of stuff is, interesting to an extent, but it's not really what I'm interested in from a game,
totally.
from a war game.
Particularly because the strength of the Age of Sigmar system is, even though, technically there's 3 ways to play, there's basically a lot of space to determine your own path within that system. Because like we've never played narrative or match play Age of Sigmar. We've always done kind of both.
Yeah, for sure.
Like we've always used some of the aspects of match play to determine how best to play some of the narrative stuff, right? And that's worked really well for us. And that's the sort of flexibility that I think most war games should have, really.
Yeah.
The other things they've discussed is bringing back things like movement values, making leadership mean something with a system that sounds quite a lot like Battle Shock from Age of Sigmar.
Yeah.
So, it'll be interesting to see how people react to that, because from my point of view, as somebody who, like loves the 40k setting, but basically hates the rules, I'm in on this, right? Like, I want them to take the kind of slash and burn approach to fixing that game. I appreciate that's not how everyone's going to feel about it, but like, I don't have any investment in the rules as they currently stand, apart from the fact that they're so opaque that it makes it not fun to pick up.
Yeah, hopefully that it'll be interesting to see to what extent they choose to keep it complicated to an extent. I think maybe they like it being their slightly more serious war game, and maybe that it'll still have that, even though it'll soften a bit. But I think the rumours are of a new edition this year. It's a hugely exciting opportunity to not to reboot the rule set, but also reboot the kind of purpose of it, and also the fiction, which has been kind of quite static in terms of the Imperium, at least. Yeah. Since I remember encountering it. Yeah. The Imperium of Man has always been the same, and this is the first time they've really started to change it and actually imply that there could be, fracture within the Imperium between more idealistic Space Marine factions and other factions. Yeah,
when you've got Space Marine Primarch returning and saying it would have been better if Horus had won.
Right, yeah. Yeah, harsh words.
So it is genuinely exciting. Like, I doubt they will do, because in a sense, Fantasy Battle had the same problem, right? Which is that nothing ever really changed. And their solution to that was to change literally fucking everything. To fast forward 1 billion years to a realm of space dragons, which obviously wasn't what everyone was looking for. I very much doubt 40k will change that much.
No.
But it would still be an epochal change simply to have the factions shift around a little bit, or to have, to loosen up the factions, which is something I'd love them to do. Like, it feels like, the current, I think one of the things that I really like about Age of Sigmar is that rather than tell you must build a faction in a particular way, it offers you bonuses for doing it in that way, but that is optional. So if I stick to Tzeentch, I massively benefit from all of the Tzeentch specific mechanics, but there is nothing in the rules that says I can't throw in whatever the fuck I want. If I want to throw in a Khorne champion into my Tzeentch army, I can. I lose some benefits, but I gain the benefit of having that character around. Yeah. And the thing that I found, looking at the 40k stuff that I do have, not 40k, the 30k stuff that I have, realizing that I'm several boxes and X number of pounds away from having a valid army because of the requirements, just the basic requirements on building an army, is a bit of a shit feeling. Right. Because it reminds me of the old days, right? Like when I was a teenager and you kind of knew that I want this, but in order to be able to field this in my army, I need to have these things. And I don't think any game is really well served by that. Like, you can find more interesting ways of incentivizing thematic or balanced army construction without really holding people to specific things.
Yeah, AOS has Battle Line, which is how they do it. And I think you kind of want armies to look like armies to an extent. You don't necessarily want them to just be 5 hero characters that are really expensive. Though you can do that. You used to be able to do that with Death. People used to just roll with Nagash and his lieutenants, and that would pretty much be the army. Yeah. And I don't know. That doesn't seem exciting to me. I like seeing lots of models down.
I think I like the variety, right? So one thing that I'm genuinely thinking about, and I've got so many projects on at the moment that I don't need another one, but if I do a 40k army one day, I'm not necessarily thinking that I'll actually do Tzeentch, even though it makes sense because I've already got so many demons that I can use them straight away. I think I'd like to do Imperial Knights, exclusively Imperial Knights.
Yeah, there's huge walkers.
And where 1,000 points might just be 3 models. Yeah. Because they're not going to be amazing at objectives and stuff, but competitive play doesn't really bother me. I like the idea of playing something completely different to the Horde stuff that I'm doing at the moment, where it's I'm just going to have 3 super important units. And I love the fiction around them and stuff like that, so it kind of fits for me.
Yeah, they're really cool.
And at the moment you can do that, but it requires all of the bolted on rules that have been implemented to allow like a knight mana pool to be a thing.
Right.
Whereas I like the idea of a game sort of supporting that by default. Actually, I don't have a problem with an army being made up of just heroes if the point system ensures that that's relatively balanced, because that's kind of interesting, right? Like, you know, we'll get to this when we talk about the game we played today, but a bunch of heroes versus the world can be an interesting encounter that operates differently to two lines of rank and file soldiers meeting each other, right? Like the game systems support that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think loosening it up to allow that to be just the way the game works is something that I'd really support.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's exciting times. It's going to be just an insane year for Games Workshop stuff. It's just crazy how much they've queued up.
Yeah, and, you know, the company's fortunes have turned around a lot as well, which is interesting. Like, I wonder if the fact that Age of Sigmar has ultimately been, like, a pretty big business success by all accounts has kind of made them more confident when it comes to applying similar changes to 40k. Because they couldn't have really, I don't know if you could have anticipated a more hostile kind of backlash against the way Fantasy Battle changed.
It went as badly as it could have gone, probably.
Yeah, and yet it was a huge success.
Yeah, it's taken a while for them to turn it around, but I mean, I can't imagine them selling a huge amount of models necessarily in the first year. But the second year, with the Sylvaneth, with the new battle tomes, the General's Handbook, feels like that was pretty much the moment where word of mouth started to spread that, you know, actually it's not a pretty good game, actually.
Yeah, and also it brought people back. That's the crucial thing, right? It brought you and I.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
yeah, for sure.
Like, I don't think either of us would have returned for a game of 8th edition Fantasy's complexity.
No, I would have painted a unit and a model for nostalgia's sake, and then that would have been the end of it.
We would never have played it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and, you know, so I think there's mileage there, which is not to say that there's not, you know, not valid things to be concerned about if the game does get a lot simpler, but honestly, I think one thing about Age of Sigmar as well is, like, from a strategic point of view, it's not a simple game. The decisions you have to make have real consequences, and we'll get to that, but it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting tactical game, I think. Like positional, it's a very positional game. It's about where your guys are, what areas of influence they have over the board. Yeah. Which is exactly what you want from a war game.
It's just that those things are expressed through a slightly simpler rule set.
Yeah, it's just, you don't need to be wheeling blocks and worrying about rank bonuses and flank charges or anything like that. You know, that's the tedious layer that is gone. Well, I personally found tedious anyway, because, you know, the historical expectation is just nonsense in Age of Sigmar. Like, the idea that there'd be 2 ranks of Stormcast and they get charged at the flank, like, they don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a big gold Superman.
Yeah,
you can deal with
exactly.
it.
And, you know, from an aesthetic point of view, I totally get people being not happy with that being the direction that Fantasy's taken.
Yeah.
But given that it is taking it, I think they've built a good game around that idea of, like we were saying, like, how do you take dwarves with rifles and turn them into, like, top hat wearing robot steam men? Well,
there it is.
There it is.
Yep.
So that's basically it for news from Games Workshop this month. I figure this is the clean segue into our own progress this month, because it's kind of, I guess, as we do this podcast more regularly, we will have an actual month of experience to draw on, whereas at this point we've got closer to 2.
Yeah, lots of things happening.
So what's, you know, you and I've played, I guess we played like 1 game in the space between pods, other than the one we played today.
Yeah.
What else has defined your month-ish in hobby stuff?
Hobby-wise, my main mission has been doing my Celestant Prime, who I got for Christmas, and I've been kind of looking at warily ever since. And finally built it and painted it up and did it all properly, did sub-assemblies and then brought them all together at the end. It's still not quite finished, but it's pretty much 90% of the way there. And that was probably the most satisfying thing I've done in the hobby since I started, I would say.
Since the very beginning.
Since the very beginning. Yeah. It's such a beautiful model. And
so to clarify, this is a big gold man in an orrery of swirling space magic.
Absolutely. I call him the Christmas tree in my head, because he looks like a Christmas tree. He's a big spiraling kind of maelstrom of energy, on which there's this guy with huge wings on top with a hammer. The Warhammer.
Galmaraz.
The whole range is named after the Warhammer. He has it. He's holding it. On his other hand, he's got a scepter that's kind of burning and it can bring down meteors. Really just beautiful centerpiece model. not the biggest one, but for the Stormcast, just a perfect kind of emblematic embodiment of their whole ideal of this kind of faceless, like automaton, beacon of justice with weird magic shit. And it's been a real pleasure to bring it together and to realise it, and it's turned out quite well. So he's sitting in the middle of my army on my shelf now, and it almost just him being there makes the rest of the army look better. Having a centerpiece really just sets off the rest of the troops and gives them a kind of almost a purpose, something to rally around.
Yeah.
So I just sort of wander over there and look at it all the time because the whole thing, just the whole effect is just fantastic.
Because you've really like doubled down a lot on the Stormcast this last month, right? Like,
yeah, I think the news of the new battle tome and the new range, and I'm really happy with the ones I've done so far. I was kind of veering. I was thinking of going to Realm of Death Sylvaneth, which is a project I wanted to do at some point and properly concept out and really do those conversions. And actually, I visited salt mines in Krakow recently, and I bought a massive bag of crystal salt, which I will use to base my Realm of Death Sylvaneth. So there'll be these kind of like pale, cloudy crystals, and there'll be a kind of crystal desert they're on.
Oh, nice.
But just if you lick them, they'll be quite nice. They'll taste good as well. It's an added bonus. But no, I decided instead to double down on the Stormcast because I love the new models. The Vanguard models are badass. Like they're kind of they've got these one-handed crossbows and axes and awesome capes, and the new kind of chicken riders look incredible. They've got an incredible sense of motion and momentum. And having the Prime is just kind of cemented. Like, I really love the Stormcast now. I'm just really into my army and love the way they look and the way they play, and feel quite emotionally connected to them.
Yeah,
quite proud of them.
It feels like your Realm of Death Sylvaneth is a bit like my Realm of Metalcorn.
Yeah,
in that it started off as like, this might take over as my main oh no, hang on.
Yeah.
Yeah, the moment the new Lord of Change came out, it was just like, I'm doing this.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think kind of arcs with the game have coincided with Games Workshop's releases very fortuitously, really, because I've always going to be well served with Stormcast, but they just brought out that book for you and for Zinch. So I think that's focused us both onto our respective armies, and there's a kind of interesting escalating war between them as well. So the idea of as we add new units, it's part of this back and forth between these two forces that have been fighting for centuries, and that's a really cool story to tell as well.
Yeah, that's so the game we played that the penultimate game we played, haven't now played one since, was so given on the last episode we talked about the game where you totally destroyed me in a turn and a half.
Oh yeah, that's
so that was brutal when we played one of the new Zinch scenarios from the Zinch book. We played the other one subsequently at our local Games Workshop, and you totally destroyed me again.
Yeah, I was surprised it was a Zinch scenario because it was very disadvantageous to them.
It is. So interestingly, both of the scenarios in the Disciples of Zinch book press both sides together really quickly.
Yeah.
They involve a lot of the factions starting in proximity to each other that you wouldn't even normally do if you were playing one of the generic match play scenarios.
No.
And that's wholly disadvantageous to the particular type of Zinch army I have, which really loves shooting but sees combat as a way of slowing you down while I get out of the way so I can shoot you some more. Like, it's never, Zinch now has some kind of chunky combat options, but I don't have them painted yet. So, there's that. But like, but that particular game felt like the sort of one of the moments where the kind of particular type of story, which as you say is about escalation, is started to click into place about our two factions, because your Stormcast keep winning, but like something goes quite badly wrong for them in every battle. Yeah,
they get quite mangled.
Yeah.
There's certain individuals over and over again.
Yeah, so specifically your Lord Celestin has now had a couple of rough run-ins.
He has. I mean, we talked last month about how his very first encounter with Zinch was to get his head blown off by Flamers. And Dracoth's reincarnate now, so the Dracoth and him can come back over and over again. And this time, he very pompously charged into quite a meek and normally not terribly effective Chaos
Sorcerer Lord. So it's not a Zinch, what used to be the Zinch Sorcerer Lord is now a Fate Master. It's an actual Chaos Sorcerer Lord because the buff is really good.
Yeah.
But Zinch marked. So I think the model was in the last pod, I think, actually. I showed off. So my converted Zinch Sorcerer Lord, who's also my general now because he's kind of the main character of my Zinch host.
He's the corruptor, the great kind of...
He's the He's the conductor / musician responsible for dooming an entire civilization by playing the bad note that makes everyone turn into a gribbly Birdman.
Yeah, his solo continues.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've pretty much wiped most of the Zinch off the table because I was able to deploy like a foot away from you, and put my
also I had one of the most spectacularly poor shooting phases it's possible to have.
Nothing died.
Nothing. Yeah, like we've discovered that most of my army shooting at one unit of liberators will do 1 wound.
Yeah, pretty much
on average, but I didn't even do that. Like
nothing.
The Zinch battle line lined up everything. Unleashed a torrent of magical flame and literally nothing happened.
It bounced off them.
And then I think you got a double turn after that, and that was the sort of...
Yeah, it was unfortunate. But yeah, it was towards the end of the battle, my general just charged your general, and I was like, okay, I'll just wipe him out then.
Because, to clarify, that's a Lord Celestin on Dracoth.
Yeah.
Versus a individual Chaos Sorcerer Lord.
Yeah, so you've got like a 8 foot tall, Stormcast Lord Celestin, like one of... They have personal chats with Sigmar in his kingdom all the time. They're that important. Like they're the most powerful of the Stormcast, apart from the Prime, riding a star lizard that can breathe lightning, and that can just rip a bloodthirster in half if it's, rolls a lot of 6s. And so coming in on this
versus a man with a staff holding what might be a green fireball, or as people have pointed out, might also be a cabbage.
Right. Cabbage wielding musician, and he got decapitated.
Yeah, so this is a really lovely use of the mechanics. So, I knew I was lost by this point, but I always tend to try and think about how to play in a narrative way anyway, but or at least a thematic way. But I knew I had nothing to lose because I'd basically already lost the game because the first time was so devastating again. Yeah. But, and genuinely, this is my favorite thing that's happened in a game, I guess probably in the last month and a half, but because I did get the return of a combat, my half of a combat phase with a 1 wound remaining Chaos Sorcerer Lord, and then the guarantee of a next turn.
Yeah.
Through expending 7 destiny dice out of a total pool of 9. So Zinch, we covered this last week, I think, but Zinch rolls 9 dice at the start of the game. And whatever those results are, you put them to one side. And then at any point when you're rolling dice for the rest of the game, you can swap in what would have been your dice roll for a destiny dice, which reflects the fact that Zinch is like the master of fate and magic and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
By expending 7 different destiny dice, I could orchestrate a situation where my melee combat, spellcasting and ranged combat guaranteed enough damage to kill your Lord Celestin from full health before it could attack again.
Yes.
As this Chaos Sorcerer Lord just fucking hulks out.
Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine he goes like Super Saiyan or something.
Yeah.
Glows, and the general looks into his eyes and sees just roars each behind it,
And this was such a lovely character. So this is one of the nice things about the game where this is totally fed into that ongoing story. Because now that idea of escalation is, Zinch and specifically the Lord of Change that I believe is being behind my army and is on his way as soon as he kind of crosses my painting table.
Yeah.
Acts through all of these kind of mortal servants. And this Lord Celestin has won a couple of battles in a row. Maybe feels quite confident going up against.
Yeah, he was definitely quite smug.
Yeah. And when he comes to encounter this puny looking sorcerer, he actually doesn't encounter that sorcerer. Suddenly, I had this idea that that sorcerer's willpower just vanished all of a sudden.
Yeah.
As he became purely an avatar for this Lord of Change acting through him. And so it was just a little, even though I had to expend 7 destiny dice to do it, it was just a little glimpse of what's coming. And it's such a nice character beat for that reason that he's
definitely
this kind of terrifying, oh shit moment where, I mean, and eventually your Lord Celestin died, but your Lord Veritant, who's the witch hunter, came to charging in after him and resolutely saw off that Chaos Sorcerer Lord, who at that point was completely spent, had nothing else to give. But
he probably just snapped back to his senses and was like, how the hell, what
did I just do?
Yeah. And of course, it must have been a rapturous moment for him to actually kind of become a vessel for Zinch in that way, as someone who's practiced his arts for centuries.
And I have this other character beat with him that he's practiced the arts for centuries, but has been denied the proper transformation. He's been denied, or Demon Prince. Right. He's been denied that kind of, that transformation. He's the the conductor, not the orchestra. So like the Zangor, who are lesser than him, have still had the transformation and the gift of that, and he hasn't. But he's had this one kind of euphoric moment of incinerating a big gold man. But it was such it required just, Destiny Dice going down to guarantee a certain amount of mortal wounds just to get that damage through. But it was such a cool thing that it came off, because you still trounced me in that game. But
it was good. It was, that's what's really kind of defined, like, the relationship between my general and your army has been the kind of defining thread for both of the forces, I think. Like, even as, talked about last month, like, my, Stormcast of Law Hunters Vizier, they're there to kind of secure knowledge and to protect knowledge that would be useful to Sigma. And that, for that reason, perhaps Tzeentch is taking an interest in them. As being potentially corruptible, more so than your average kind of Celestial Vindicators who just mindlessly kill.
Yeah, I mean, the way, we talked about this earlier, but like, all beings in that fiction are closer to one Chaos God or another. It's not about being actively corrupted at first necessarily, but like, if you are an honorable warrior who, prides themselves on victory in combat, then you are naturally hewing closer to Khorne, whether you like it or not. If you grow a beautiful garden, you're hewing closer to Nurgle, whether you like it or not. If you like a glass of wine at 6 o'clock with your episode of Grand Designs, you're hewing closer to Slaanesh.
It always starts small things.
It starts small, but but your Stormcast hew closer to Tzeentch, basically, in terms of their kind of alignment and interest.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, the way the fiction has gone for the Stormcast is that they are being changed by the realms. And the idea is that this faction that has been fighting for centuries is also being changed in that way. And I want to reflect that visually eventually, maybe kind of start attaching scrolls to their armor and, giving them that slightly, not overtly Tzeentchian, but just kind of, showing a love of obsession with knowledge, obsession with scrolls and text.
Tell you what, collecting Tzeentch gives me a bit box full of scrolls. So if you want some, I'll give you some scrolls.
That would
be also have to clip some Tzeentch symbols off them.
That would be amazing, because you'd be
literally
you'd be physically corrupting my army with your bits box, which, that's always too good. I love that idea. Which would be great. I really want to, I want to buy some more Liberators. I love the Liberators. They're the Stormcast's basic unit. They've got a big shield and a big hammer. I want to buy a box of those and properly develop the Law Hunters of Azir as what they should look like, basically. They look a lot like the Hammers of Sigmar, because that's how it all started. But properly give them scrolls and loads of stuff. Maybe some
I
shields.
see your army as like part of the Hammers of Sigmar, but like a different chamber that
absolutely.
operates in its own
specialized way. And, under the command of Tantris, which is my general, like they've become this other thing now. Which is rad.
So the other side of it is that, given that interest in your general started with that first battle, which we decided was during that first invasion at the beginning of the Age of Sigmar, his death was my Gaunt Summoner is probably my Lord of Change's first experience of Stormcast reincarnation and seeing the bolt go back to his ear and that kind of thing. What that sort of fed back down to, and one of the ways that I can keep spinning all of these losses into feeling a little bit like victories in some ways, is exposing your Lord Celestant to the sort of energies of Tzeentch is the ongoing mission. And so, and that takes the form of this song, right? Like this eternal piece of shifting music. And so my kind of general sorcerer who has been denied this kind of transcendental moment that he's seen other people receive through his own craft. The way I'm thinking about it at the moment is that his task really is to kind of essentially play all 999 verses of this piece of transcendental music to your general.
That's completing his undermining and corrupting him.
I deliberately set a big number involving a lot of nines. Nine is Tzeentch's numbers. Number. But like, it's partly because we may never get there, but the idea is that like, it's the sort of like, with every death, Tzeentch is pulling something from that, right? Like either it's because your general is being exposed to this stuff more and more and more, or because every time he goes back to his ear, something is changed or something is lost, or ultimately that reforging is a process of change. And it all ties back, right? So I really like that idea as fiction, because maybe it doesn't go anywhere and I don't do anything with it, but I like that as a kind of motivator.
It's a good hook there, I think.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me imagine what a kind of a Zeech corrupted version of my general would even look like.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do that conversion as a model, that could be like, you wouldn't necessarily have a Dracoth, but you could put him on some sort of mount, and then also give, have him in Stormcast armor, but covered in the livery of Zeech, the symbols of Zeech. And change his colours and stuff. It could be a really awesome version.
But maybe he never even gets
Maybe that
there.
never happens.
But but hence 999. Because
Yes.
so far we're on like 4.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was a really cool moment, even though, another Zeech is yet to win in the traditional sense.
But all those powerful units are still to be built, and I've got like loads of units coming. So I've got a whole Vanguard force in the post and a Star Drake.
We spoke, Jesus, we've spoken about this already, but like we see the Prime, which you've been working on, coming down as soon as the Lord of Change appears.
That's right. So I'm not going to use the Prime in any battles. Like that's going to be the first time the Prime appears. It's the first time I'm ever going to use them will be when the Lord of Change appears. Then the Prime is going to be in that army. That's going to be his entry into like the story, into everything.
It's cool. Like, this is what we're talking about, like having these different ways to play. It's like, that's a cool moment, right? Like,
and it's worth not just playing with it. Like it's worth kind of denying myself, the fun of playing with that model just for the story beat of suddenly having this amazing kind of powerful character to play with. Yeah. To go head to head with your most powerful unit as well.
Exciting.
Good stuff. Yeah, I can't wait for that.
So, I've had a bit of a weird month. In a way, it's sort of a shame that like this is the 2 months between our first and second episode for me, because I had a spectacularly busy, for other reasons, couple of months, basically, between getting ready to leave my day job to go freelance and leaving my day job to go freelance, left me with much less time for hobby than I thought I would have. So, the vast majority of my hobby time has actually been spent on the same tactical squad of Thousand Suns, 30k era Thousand Suns for the Burning of Prospero game that I was working on last time. And as of the time this podcast goes up, I think they'll finally be done. I'm now at the decals and basing stage.
Nice.
And like, I'm happy with how they've turned out. They've taken me a lot longer than I hoped they would. But my Thousand Suns have always been a side project. Like, I really like them. Like, I love the fiction, but like, I've still got that giant pile of Zangor to build, and I'm excited to bring them in. Yeah.
Are you, do you have any trepidation about doing the Zangor, given that it's such a big job?
Not really, because actually, I've settled on what the color scheme's going to be and how I'm going to tie them into stuff I've already done, make them my own, that kind of thing. I know that I'm going to use the Fang, which is a kind of grey-blue spray. Well, it's a grey blue shade, and they do a spray of it as the base coat, as a primer, because I know how I want to do them, which will be a little bit more efficient than the Zangor I did from the Silver Tower box. They're incredibly ornate models, but actually, one thing I've learned is that I actually quite like batch painting, as long as I don't have to repeat myself too much in terms of going back to stages I've already done.
Okay.
So all of that big block of 20 Zangor I'm going to build, I'm going to do in one massive go. And it'll take a while, but I'm okay with doing the same thing over and over again for 20 models in a row, as long as I don't then have to do it for another 20, having done a bunch of other things. So that's just a little bit of personal kind of understanding how my own discipline works. So kind of not, it's still a lot. Like, I've still got 27 Zangor to get through before I've done the whole set. And there's no way it's not going to take a while. But also, like, they are, cool, expressive models, and they're quite interesting to paint because it's all kind of interesting surfaces.
Yeah.
And I've learnt a lot. Like, I've learnt a lot about how to do trim, like gold trim. When I first did my original set of Zangor for the Silver Tower box, I thought it made sense to paint all of the trim first and then paint the interiors of the armor after that. No, hang on, to do it the other way around. To paint all the interior of the armor first and then the trim.
Yeah.
And actually, that's the worst way of doing it.
Yeah, definitely.
It looked good when you finished it, but it exposes you to a lot more risk, and it requires you to be a lot more careful while doing the trim. And I've learned that lesson since. So, is it going to be easy? No, because they are extremely ornate models for what are essentially horde units. But I'm less nervous about it than I was.
I guess I
say that now.
Experience under your belt as well. Maybe if this had been one of the first things you'd have attempted in the hobby, it would have been, put you off.
Yeah, like I don't think Zeech Mortals makes for a particularly, or at least the, dedicated Zangor stuff makes for a particularly inviting army. Like you were saying this earlier, when we were looking through the models, and it's like, shit, if this is your first army, you're never going to paint these.
Hard mode, yeah.
But, I'm looking forward to seeing how they look when they're all done and everything else. And actually, like, I've been through such a long multi-stage process to do my Thousand Suns, which I think will end up looking good, but like, it's been a long process to achieve a relatively simple effect, which is like metallic red. With, gold trim and everything else, that like, one side of that is, it's taken me the better part of 3 months, in which time getting distracted has meant that I've done like 3 other projects in the time that it's taken me to finish this one tactical squad.
Right.
But now that they're getting close to done and the decals are coming on, I'm like seeing the payoff, which is always what it's about, right?
Awesome,
like,
yeah.
it's always that moment where you're like, oh shit, this is why I spent all that time on it. Cause you always just think about the stages, right? Like I've gone into every day of painting thinking, today I'm just going to paint highlights on the edge of all of the black bits. Or this is the time I do the second coat of red ink over the gold or something like that. Whereas now that the bits are coming together, it's like, oh, this is why I was doing it. I was doing it so that I'd end up with a cool looking squad of Space Marines, which sounds dumb because obviously that's why you're doing it. But still, you can easily lose track of that.
Yeah. Yeah. They look sweet though. And that Prospero set's really nice. I can't wait to play the game.
Yeah.
It's going to be really awesome.
Really looking forward to playing the game. So we're getting close now with that set done that we'll both be able to play.
Yeah. I need to paint up Grigor, Gregor, the man who likes wolves, who leads the Space Wolves.
Gregor Wolf fan.
But, the whole premise of that game is crazy. I'm definitely the aggressor. Like, if the Space Wolves come down and they just kill all the humans in the city because they don't like the fact that the Thousand Sons are reading too much in their giant library.
It's great. Like, it's such a cool piece of fiction. Like, and it kept me kind of excited to play that game and hypothetically maybe to build out a 30k force eventually, because I do love the Thousand Sons fiction and like,
it's great.
Also, cool. I'm basically looking forward to being able to say the phrase, don't talk to me or my Thousand Sons ever again, over and over again.
That's going to come up in Prospero, isn't it?
Yeah. That's going to say that every time. I'm going to say that every turn.
Fantastic. I need some Space Wolf puns.
Yeah.
I'll think of some.
Don't talk to me or my Thousand Sons ever again, said Arzik Ahriman, first librarian of Tizca.
He's awesome. Love that model.
Yeah, it's a great model. Otherwise, I guess my month has been, so this has been a really interesting month for X-Wing, and like we didn't talk about X-Wing last time. We sort of thought we might, and then didn't, because obviously it's a game I play a shitload of as a miniature game, but you don't. Although you've got some bits and bobs.
I've got a small scum force I don't know how to use, but I love the game. I think it's a beautiful rule set.
Yeah, we should actually play it.
Yeah, definitely. I need to. You can teach me some things.
Yeah. So it's been one of the reasons we didn't talk about it last time was because ultimately, like, I think I hadn't crossed over a certain threshold of like interesting times. But this has been a really interesting month in X-Wing. So if you don't mind, I was going to tell you a little bit about how things changed. So I went to a regional tournament at the beginning of this month in Cardiff. I did Cardiff Regional last year and did all right. Came 17th in Cardiff Regional last year. It's out of 100 or something people. So awesome. Like, but X-Wing has been in a really strange place for a while. So this is Fantasy Flight's Star Wars dogfighting game. It's a beautiful game. Like, and I mean that in the pure football sense. Like at its core, it's a really beautifully designed game that gets a lot right. Like it's a brilliant balance of what I would describe as like analog and digital skills. Some of it is pure list building, squadron building strategy, understanding how upgrades work and how to deploy them, dice rolling and finding ways to secure or to, try and increase the odds that your dice are going to go your way, that kind of thing through strategic decisions. Part of it is also this analog layer of, setting a maneuver for your ship, but without being able to measure it in advance.
Yeah.
So playing X-Wing over a long period of time, and I've been playing X-Wing for 18 months now, I guess, competitively. You gain this genuine muscle memory is the wrong word for it. It's more like muscle vision, which doesn't make any sense.
A kind of spatial awareness.
Yeah, genuine spatial awareness. For like, when I started playing, I wouldn't be able to reliably tell you where a 2-speed bank maneuver into a barrel roll could or would take you, both for myself and for my opponent. Now I can.
Yeah.
relatively reliably. And that's a really satisfying thing. That's something that, I think games like Age of Sigmar have, but not to the same extent. Because you're talking about bubbles of either potential movement or bubbles of...
Yeah, it's softer as well. You can measure everything with your opponent, so you know.
Yeah, you can pre-measure everything in Age of Sigmar. You can pre-measure almost nothing in X-Wing. And also because X-Wing is simulating the movements of spaceships that don't just stop, or well, most of them don't just stop. Your previous decisions have a big bearing on what your next decision has to be. There's no Age of Sigmar style kind of moving forward, stopping, going backwards a little bit. It's not a qualitative distinction. It's just a very different thing. But one of the things that, has happened with X-Wing and it's been interesting is, the way that power creep manifests in a game like that. Because the way that power creep expresses itself in X-Wing is through more powerful upgrades and that kind of thing. Upgrade cards that come along that just do things better than the previous generation of cards did. And in Magic the Gathering has had things like this, like most living games do, right? Sure. Like, Age of Sigmar certainly will, right? There'll be stuff that comes along that's just better, right? It's already seen some of that stuff, right? Yeah. They've had to adjust shooting for obvious reasons.
And they're going to cut back on the Kernoth Hunters in Sylvaneth, I think. In General's Handbook 2. Yeah, definitely.
So, but one of the really interesting things about X-Wing is that because it's essentially two games. It has the card game and it has the positioning game. The power creep is most strongly felt within the positioning game. Sorry, within the card game. The positioning game is affected by it, but only if something like a ship is just too maneuverable, which has happened. For the most part, it's within cards that power creep is most keenly felt. And as cards become more important, the positioning game, the strategic game, the kind of second guessing your opponent's moves game becomes less important. And it reached a point I felt where, and a lot of my friends felt, where increasingly, a narrow selection of extremely powerful upgrades had meant that while it was possible to win with an out there squadron or an original squadron, the best things in the game was so good that when you're talking about coming first in rounds of Swiss out of hundreds of players, you take the stuff that's reliable. Yeah. Because it's easier. Because it requires you to make fewer decisions. Because it is more forgiving of mistakes. Because the positioning of your ships matters less. And that isn't to say that the best players don't ultimately rise to the top, but there's an element of randomness in any large tournament. And that means that it's not just the best players that rise to the top, it's the best players with the squadrons that are least likely to be upset by random chance. That's just maths. And the game had got into a really unfortunate place. And this actually led to something strange, which is, that regional. And I've done a lot of big X-Wing tournaments, but that regional was the first time I've ever been walked away, having to admit to myself that I had no fun. And because I brought something that I really liked, and was competitive, and I had just a rough day. Not a lot, would cop to most of it being stuff I had to own, with a few moments of one specific moment of fucking terrible luck, where essentially there's you have a damage deck of 33 cards, each of which has critical damage on them. There were 2 cards in that deck that completely fuck me if they come in a particular matchup, and I managed to pull both of them, which is just total luck of the draw kind of thing. So that happened, but that's not really the most important thing. The broader point was that I realized about halfway through that tournament that having brought my own thing, given just law of averages, I couldn't compete with how efficient the most efficient stuff in the game was, and how forgiving the most efficient stuff in the game was.
So you've got a kind of a tier of lists there. You've got you've got the competitive tier then, and you have the fluff tier, which is what used to happen in Warhammer Fantasy. Absolutely.
So, and I thought I had my list was relatively competitive, but it was the knowledge that I need good matchups all day if I'm going to progress, and I hit meta stuff quite a lot, and it was sort of just holding my own, but having to work my fucking arse off for every inch of ground, and often having opponents just having an easier time of it because more powerful upgrades.
Well, they just drive around with turrets and
it's not turrets really. It's more to do with action efficiency and stacked defenses, but I won't get into the nitty-gritty bits of it. But So actually I walked away from that tournament thinking, I think I might be done for a while. Like I've got a too big a collection of X-Wing to move away from it completely, as you can tell.
Yeah, it's amazing. We're sitting opposite Chris's bookshelf full of the miniatures are beautiful. Actually, their miniatures are really nice for pre-painted.
They're lovely. Yeah,
they're really, really good.
Things. Like, I painted a few of them myself, but like they're such good miniatures for pre-painted particularly, and they're getting better as well. I thought I need to, if not move away from the game, move away from tournaments. I'm going to stick to playing with friends. I'm going to just sort of move away from it. And then to the extent that I went and emailed a friend and said, look, I'm dropping out of your tournament. I need a break from this. Like, I'm just a bit tired of the way the game is played at the moment. 3 days later, Fantasy Flight released an FAQ update that catastrophically nerfs all the things that annoy me about the game. Like, so annoyingly, not 3 days too late to save my experience of that particular regional, but there was this huge, like, it was a really interesting experience because it was this feeling of like having a weight off, because there's a lot of, it's a very loaded thing in any competitive setting to say, I feel like the game isn't fun anymore because the things other players are using are too forgiving. Because obviously, like, every game challenges players not to get frustrated, not to get salty, not to, you know, and I think whenever you find yourself thinking this other guy's only winning because of his overpowered list or whatever it is, you have to analyze your own play and you have to think about what you could have done differently. And in every instance, there is always something you could have done differently. But I had reached that point with X-Wing where I was second guessing myself constantly, but I was like, I think this is too good. Like, I think you're getting more for free than I am.
Yeah.
And for the same points value. And I don't think I can get past this. And that was where my kind of decision to move away from competitive play came from. So to have the creators of the game come along and express agreement with that idea by nerfing stuff, in some cases extremely heavily, it made me feel like I hadn't just lost my mind. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I was actually not wrong to feel like the game was in a rough place because, you know, they nerfed one particular combo so badly that a particular list that won the world championships last year no longer works. It can't be done because it was broken. And that's an important thing to express, I think.
I think there was some, it sounded to me from talking to you about this, that if you looked at like the top 10 lists for various tournaments, for the big tournaments, you'd see the same list over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is a massive symptom of a list that is overstretched, overreached. You know, the power reach has kind of gone a bit too far. If like 8 out of 10 lists are the same thing,
yeah,
that's not good for a competitive landscape.
Poor factional balance and stuff as well.
Right.
Like, so, you know, Scum were absolutely ascendant in every possible way, and that was a thing, right? Like, and you know, the game has shifted over time, but yeah, so that was an interesting experience, and since then I've sort of tentatively made my return to it, and because ultimately I do love that game, but there was it was. I think it's still. I don't think the dark times are behind us. I think like there's the ongoing challenge of balancing X-Wing has been really interesting, just from a game design point of view.
Yeah,
something they've just announced the next wave of ships, and something interesting that's happening is they're finally seemingly properly flattening the differences between the factions. Previously, Imperials, Rebels, and Scum had meaningful differences. And one of the things that went wrong, arguably, with the game was that those differences got eroded quite a lot, which is pretty much that Scum got given a lot of the toys that previously were the things keeping them from having everything. Or almost everything. Whereas, you know, in the next wave, there seems to be a kind of decision that, hey, okay, we're going to actually have a relatively flat game with subtler differences between the factions, which is an interesting direction. I'm kind of curious to see where it goes.
Yeah.
Essentially, it means giving Imperials loads of turrets, which is a thing Imperials never had.
Okay.
But, you know, without getting into the boring details, like, it's really interesting time in the life of that game, because it feels like it's now a mature game that has to account for the fact that it has 11 waves of upgrades that started to cause problems for each other. And I've had so many deep and meaningful conversations at tournaments with X-Wing friends about this, but, you know, it'll be interesting to see if it reaches the point where it requires a ban list, like Magic has, or like a card rotation or something like that. Whereas, actually, one of the things, as we said at the beginning of this podcast, one of the heartening things about Age of Sigmar at the moment is they're setting this precedent for, like, a yearly battle tome for the Stormcast, perhaps, a yearly General's Handbook update, And all of that stuff allows them to make soft balance adjustments to a game that's a lot looser.
Yeah.
And gives me a little bit more hope that it'll kind of remain.
It could be a continuum rather than a kind of, edition-based pattern. Yeah, I think my problem with X-Wing is, it's very unclear how much it's going to cost me to buy into a certain wave and actually get the cards I need to play. And I don't so much mind the expense as the uncertainty around the expense of a new wave. Whereas with Age of Sigmar, because there's a hobby draw there as well, I know everything's inherently worthwhile to me. But I don't want to be buying some X-Wings to get a card that I'm going to use in my scum list or something, which seems to be where X-Wing is at.
Which where I'd like them to go differently with Shadespire.
Right.
Like I'd love Shadespire to have card packs separate to miniatures packs.
Yeah, definitely.
Like give me the character cards for the miniatures I'm buying, but allow me to buy the upgrade cards separately. I don't think they'll do that.
No. Okay.
Because I think the X-Wing model has business advantages.
It definitely works.
They've loosened it up a lot. Like X-Wing, they're getting better at it.
Yeah.
Like they're getting better at packing ships with the cards you actually need for that ship.
Right.
Rather than the thing they were doing of like packing upgrades for completely different ships in with different things or like, fixes and that kind of thing. But it's not perfect. Far from it. Like, and, it is still, it's a very different hobby to Age of Sigmar because if you play it competitively, you probably own one of everything, which would be insane in Warhammer, right?
Yeah. That's true.
But yeah, so interesting times of the game. Like, I think they're moving in a good direction now, but we had a year now of actively quite bad X-Wing meta, and that's always concerning because it's such a good underlying game.
Yeah.
And it is now apparently the most popular miniatures game in the world. But yeah, I think the challenge of, I think the challenge of balancing X-Wing has been a surprise for Fantasy Flight because I don't think they've ever had a game this popular before.
Yeah.
Or this,
but they do Netrunner, don't they? That's incredibly competitive.
Yes, but I think a card game is a little bit easier to. I know from talking to friends who play Netrunner competitively, it's had similar moments to X-Wing. Right. I think X-Wing, if you're into game design, X-Wing is a really fascinating case study because of the two disciplines that it combines, and that ultimately that spatial awareness aspect of the game is more interesting from a competitive point of view than the ability to correctly deploy upgrade cards.
Right.
And so when one eats away at the other, it's to the genuine loss of the game. And that's a really interesting archetype because nothing in Age of Sigmar or nothing in a Warhammer game kind of reflects that really. Like if you play a TIE swarm, so you're playing 8 TIE fighters on a board, your game is entirely setting the right maneuvers because you have nothing else. You've just got the most basic ship in the game and lots of them. And that can be up against, say, 2 large scum ships that are absolutely loaded with upgrades. Just 2 ships full of crew members and upgrades and everything else that give you shitloads of tricks, basically, where your position matters less than your understanding of the way in which different upgrade cards interact with each other. And both are valid ways to play, but if the game at its healthiest, those 2 things are balanced. Where it's just about which way you want to try and outthink your opponent. But the problem is when it becomes all about cards, then you might as well play Magic. And that's the sort of the tricky.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, the tricky thing. Huh. That's enough about X-Wing for the month.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So on to so you've painted your Celestant Prime.
Yes.
This month. Given that we attempted to set a precedent for tips about painting, does anything spring to mind that you've learned or considered this month that you would pass on to a painter?
Don't ever paint prosecutor wings in any context if you can ever help it.
Okay.
Those wings are just, I don't know what to do with them. I mean, they're these big spiky wings that, the Stormcast flying units have, and it's unclear whether they're supposed to be beams of energy or actually kind of corporeal, like magic sticks or
I saw them as beams of energy.
I thought so as well. So I basically just painted them white and then washed them with kind of, half and half Guilliman blue, glaze. But that doesn't really work. I've seen people wash them and then dry brush them white. But getting a kind of glowing energy effect on those wings, and there are probably like 100 spikes on it that make up the wings, and no one's going to go in and layer them like by hand. That's just a nightmare.
Yeah, you're not going to paint 100 power swords, right?
No, exactly. So it's just a really difficult part of the model, and it kind of looks cool, just white, just looks slightly unfinished, as though I need to put some sort of effect on it. So it's less of a tip and more of a just kind of
A warning.
A warning. Stay away. Don't do prosecutor wings unless you absolutely have to. Which is just kind of a shame in terms of like actually learning new techniques and stuff. The Prime benefits a lot from freehand on the actual kind of maelstrom that he's sitting on, which I've done as kind of a gradient from purple through to blue, but each kind of energy beam on it has been kind of shaded from white down to, the colour of the gradient, and put loads of stars in it and stuff like that. But those techniques are just stuff that I've done previously for the rest of the army, but had to do a lot on this one particular element.
What is your method for doing stars? Because I really like the stars you've done on your cloaks and stuff.
I think it depends a lot on the kind of corona you put around them. So ultimately they're going up to a near white colour, and that's the actual star. But it's kind of what actually makes them look cool is the colour build up to that pinprick of light, which comes entirely from the background colour. So if it's, if the background is purple, you're going to want to build up through the purple colour range into a near white point. And that gives it the sense that it's a kind of a light that's illuminating space around it, rather than if you just put like a dot of white on a black background, it doesn't really look like a star. Like it's amazing how it just doesn't look quite right. You have to give them a bit of colour backing, a little bit of a sense that they're almost like a light source in fog. You know how the fog will
like
pick up the light, diffuse light, a little bit of that. And that's not how stars work. If you actually look up at the sky, they don't do that. But when it comes to painting, I think that's a really important thing to do, to make, because otherwise it just looks like your paintbrush has gone wrong, as though there's a splodge of paint there that it just doesn't make any sense. But once you give it a little bit of colour around it, it's almost as though, oh yeah, that's intentional, and it just becomes part of the rest of the model then. Yeah,
it's interesting how important intentionality is. Like, as soon as you make it look like you deliberately did something,
it becomes part, you buy into it more. And the eye just kind of doesn't see it as it's also, I think the thing with models is that very, very high contrasts, like if you have those on your model, they should be in somewhere really important, somewhere that the eye is going to go to, because, a big kind of value contrast in colour tone is where the eye is going to pick up on that immediately. And if that's off, or kind of doesn't make sense, or is drawing the eye somewhere pointless, like a cape, it has to be softened in some way. So that kind of gradient that a point of light can sit on softens that contrast and stops it from being too noisy a component of the model. So yeah, I guess that constitute a tip.
Yeah.
There you go. I did a tip. Yeah.
You did a tip.
Awesome.
So, I mean, I don't have much to share this week because honestly, I've just painted shiny red men, but,
yeah. But, did you talk about the process behind that, last week?
I don't know if I did. So, I'll share some pictures of that finished tactical squad with this episode, but so, and actually, a friend was doing something similar for their corn, so maybe it's worth sharing the method. So I think now that, as we mentioned last week, now that, Games Workshop has just, released its like Artificer tint range. Yeah. That's quite hard to find, and you have to buy all the tints at once. So it's not necessarily an ideal solution, but that allows you to make, add some red ink to some red, silver or gold paint to make red metallic paint, if that's what you want. The way I have done my Thousand Suns is to spray them gold, then wash and sort of touch up, make sure that there's an even coat of retributed gold, then wash them with Reikland Flesh Shade, which is a good shade for gold generally. Yeah. Into all the recesses, possibly twice, depending on kind of the parts of the model. And then to paint, using a non-citadel color of Vallejo Transparent Red, 2 or 3 watered down thin coats of red transparent, basically red ink, but none of the GW inks really are quite right for this, over the parts that will be red until you get an even coat with no obvious brush strokes showing. And then to shade those parts of the model with Carroburg Crimson, and then to shade them again in the darkest reaches with Nuln Oil. And that gives you, it's kind of an interesting way to paint, because it's all about shading down rather than getting a base coat in and then doing highlights up to light, because and in that sense, it's actually the opposite of doing, non-metallic metals, where you kind of create the impression of metal through the use of matte colors. It's all about starting with a bright metal, gold, and then tinting it and then shading it so that you have some meaningful, because the fact that it's a reflective paint will give you some depth and shading, or not shading, but some, the sense of the light hitting the material anyway.
Yeah, just the material does that for you. 'Cause it's metallic.
But it doesn't look as good as it could without some actually additional shading, and that comes through the use of washes, I found.
Yeah.
Particularly Carabao Cremes and the Null, just to kind of around things like the bottom halves of shoulder pads to ensure that there is a more pronounced gradient from the bottom of the shoulder pad to the top, rather than just letting the light do it. It's a very messy and time consuming process. And when I do my second tactical squad, I'm definitely going to, do them in a lot of sub-assemblies, possibly entirely sub-assemblies, which might sound nuts, but one of the weaknesses of this process is, nothing can be wrong. Nothing in the recesses can be left behind. If you base coat a traditional model gray or black and you miss a tiny bit in a recess, your eye probably isn't going to catch it as you look at the model.
Yeah.
But when the base is gold, if you don't catch it, you can fucking tell. There's no getting around that. So it took a long time. Originally I thought it was going to be a time saving measure. I was wrong. Because it's like a 6-coat process to get things to work. But I really do like the way they look.
They look great, yeah.
And I think it suits the set. I think it's, it suits the Horus Heresy thing to feel a little more grounded, to be able to tell the materials that things are made of. And then there's a lot of stages after that in terms of doing eyes, the black, and so on. The other thing is if you do it, don't do what I did. Don't spray the entire model gold. Save the bolters and the guns and everything that's going to be black and spray them black. Because painting black over gold is a pain in the arse.
Yeah, Games Workshop's Abaddon black base coat, it does not cover well.
No. It took me 3 coats to get over everything. Yeah. So it's one of the reasons it's taken me 4 months. And the next one won't take me that long, I don't think. But I suppose in terms of, if you're not planning to paint red metal men, then the 2 things that I've maybe helpfully learned in a sort of transferable skills kind of way this month, one of them is to know when something is basically done enough. Because ultimately, even though I want these Thousand Suns to look good, I can always go back and improve the edge highlighting on parts of the black bits and stuff like that. There are also pieces that I want to use for a game that we want to play. And there was definitely a point where I stopped trying as hard, but where I was just like, you know what? No one's going to fucking notice if the edge highlighting on the shell casing ejector bit of this bolt gun on the side of it facing the marine isn't as detailed as it could be. Stop it, you idiot. And that, because my return to painting happened with Silver Tower, I really wanted every model to look good because all of them do stand in isolation. I know that I'm going to be taking Thousand Suns off the table by the fistful, which is something I learned with my Pink Horrors as well, where I lavished all this time on them, and it's like, they've got 1 wound each behind a 5-up save, and I'm often taking them off the board in heaped handfuls. Yeah. And suddenly the amount of time I spent making sure that all their knuckles were highlighted doesn't feel like it was really worth it. So there's a sense of I'm starting to learn to know what each model is for. Yeah. And where it's worth dialing up the effort and where it's worth just going, this looked good from a distance. You're done.
I think having, doing the prime, again, it's like where your eye goes. Your eyes go to the heroes, or as they should do. Obviously, you don't want your baseline units outshining your big important units, really. That's where all the attention and, magic should go.
Yeah. The other thing is, so this has also been my first experience since I came back to the hobby of decals. And I've got 3 of them fully decaled up now, and I'm doing the rest. And I was very, very nervous about decals because they feel like the kind of thing that can go horribly fucking wrong.
Yeah, very hard to fix, I imagine, if they...
Yeah, and the thing that has helped me a lot is there's stuff called Microset and Microsol, which you can find on Amazon. It cost me about 10 quid for a set of both. These 2 little 1-ounce bottles. And one of them, basically softens decals, makes them easier to move around. It smells like vinegar, probably because it is vinegar. I would recommend you use vinegar for this kind of thing, or it's vinegar related. You paint it onto your model, and after you've soaked the decal in water, and it makes it easier to move around while it's on the model, and it softens it. The other one is the kind of miracle worker, because what it seems to do is soften the decal to the point where it sort of not melts, but it kind of sinks flush with the surface that it's on. Because decals can often, whoever decided that Space Marine shoulder pads should A, be curved, and B, have decals on them was a fucking monster, because decals do not like curved surfaces.
They tend to wrinkle.
Yeah.
And, sort of catch themselves. And, yeah.
So one of your options is to slice little holes in them, or slice little, slits in them so that they have a place to go. But for the Thousand Suns, one of the key shoulder pad decals is like an ornate scarab beetle that is not going to slice nicely.
No.
And I found that the micro sole has been a complete lifesaver there, and it's really made that a lot more pleasant, a lot quicker. So that's less of a technique thing and more of a, I think if you're doing a lot of decals on an army, I think that's really worth looking into, because for a tenner, it's, it solves the problem of, there are a billion tutorials on the internet of how to use vinegar and stuff to do this kind of thing, but I would rather spend a little bit of money to get something designed for that purpose that I have faith kind of works properly. And then so far it's definitely felt very like it's made a difference. Yeah,
decals are the thing I've just not attempted yet. I mean, I could put some on my Stormcast. They all come with decals. But yeah, that is good advice. I think I'll pick up a set of those.
Yeah, or you can borrow mine. But like,
I'll borrow yours for the Space Wolves, and if they work, I'll buy some for my Stormcast. I think.
Yeah, because it's made a difference. So yeah, that's I think that's our painting tips for the month.
Yeah, it is. It's exciting. Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have loads of stuff to paint next month because all my Vanguard are arriving, and
I'm just gonna lean into this hard.
Yeah,
I'm all right. Like I've done my first almost month of freelance life now, where I know what the rhythm is, and now I can do the thing I went freelance to do in the first place, which is work a bit and then paint little men.
Right.
So that brings us on to today's game, I think.
Indeed.
So we played, we figured, so today was kind of an interesting one because it was very similar armies to the ones we clashed against each other last time. In fact, I don't think we had a new unit in either. Yeah. The things that had changed in the meantime were the Stormcast Battle Tome.
Yes.
And its scenarios.
Yeah, so we decided to play one of the two scenarios in the new book, which is a kind of breakthrough scenario where the Stormcast defending a settlement and their opposing army has to get units past off the board edge behind them.
Yeah.
As they progress lengthways down the table towards them. And so Zinch in this scenario needed to get 3 units off the board for a victory.
Yeah.
And it was really fucking close.
It was really fucking close.
It was a really, really great game.
It might be one of my favorite games that we've played, actually, because it was the ones where it felt like the one where the identities of our armies meaningfully played off each other rather than one of them simply rolling over the other.
Right. It was.
Because, I mean, admittedly, our previous games, I've never beaten you, but in the game where we had one game where I almost did, simply because my kind of shooting and magic power, like, annihilated you off the bat.
Yeah. Whereas
this felt like the time that our individual strengths didn't result in a clear advantage, which is kind of perfect. We also did, you chose to keep your fulminators, which are your mini dragon riding cavalry, and retributors, which traditionally cause me all my problems.
Yes.
In the celestial realm, per the new rules, right?
Yep. That's right. The rest I deployed in basically a shield wall across the board, which the Liberators are very good at. They're your basic troops. They're big shields. You can just form a line with them and they're surprisingly resilient. They're just very hard to get through, especially for Zinch. And then I put my big sort of shock troops up in the realms. Of course, the difficult thing about that is that every movement phase, you roll for each unit you have in the Celestial Realm, and on 3+ they come down, and you have to roll for them. So you can't sort of keep them off until turn 3 and then roll for them. Like, they are going to come down when they come down, basically. And on a 3+, so you don't quite know what's going to happen. 3+ is certainly not a sure thing.
No.
I mean, they could have come down in any way. But, I wanted to get behind your pink horrors, basically, and didn't want those big guys getting swamped. So
I think I was a little bit smarter with the deployment in this game than I have been previously. So I created I knew I need to get 3 units off the table. So I created a wedge of demons on one side of the board with the Screamers, my Flamers, the Herald of Zinch, and one, a screen of pink horrors. And then on the other side of the board, I had another big clump of pink horrors, next to a line of Kyric Acolytes who are kind of filling in for pink horrors in the middle, even though they're mortal humans and do actually care about being killed. And then I kept, my Aggro Thaumaturge, Zangor, Gaunt Summoner, and Chaos Sorcerer Lord in a sort of central point behind them all.
Yeah.
Together. I was worried about your ability to deploy from space because that's always been a problem in every game we've played. But the interesting thing about this scenario relative to some of the other ones we've played is because I need to get off the other side of the board and retributors are slow, I had the idea that if I can stay out ahead of you, I'm not going to deal with them. I'm just going to run.
Yeah.
And that almost worked. So, the other interesting decision that I've become more critical about is who takes the first turn.
Yeah.
Because I traditionally finish deploying first because I think you have more smaller units because Stormcast-like units of 5 men.
Yeah. Yes.
My units tend to be a bit bigger and there are fewer of them. So, I took the first turn for 2 reasons, because the downside taking the upside taking the first turn, the obvious one is you get to shoot first and maybe you can kill some people. The downside is because of the rolling for the next turn mechanic, it means that potentially the other player can get a double turn.
Yeah.
Which is potentially devastating. And I took the first turn partly because I felt like I needed to get underway. I couldn't risk getting beaten up.
Yeah, it's definitely the right decision.
In place. The other side of it is because your command ability with the Lord Celestin on Dracoth makes a lot of your units immune to battle shock. I meant going first means you haven't had a chance to deploy that command ability, which means that potentially you get 1 turn in the entire game where battle shock is going to be meaningful to you, which is the chance for units to run away.
Yeah.
So I kind of made that decision, but my first turn was like, it didn't go as well as I'd hoped, simply because, so a few crucial fail casting rolls. So my Gaunt Summoner, whose job was going to be to sit on a Balewind Vortex, big space tornado, in the middle of the battlefield, blocking some crucial areas, but also with a huge spellcasting bubble to support the rest of the army, failed the casting roll on the Balewind Vortex, which was a bit of an issue. And then through all of my spells and shooting, I managed to kill, so I killed a couple of Liberators and 1 Prosecutor from your unit of Prosecutors who was turned into tentacles.
He was. Fell to the ground and smushed into
many, many
fleshy
tentacles.
paste.
And then and it was an interesting turn because there was only 1 combat, which was my Screamers throwing themselves into your Liberators.
Yeah.
Which wasn't massively eventful, but it did a bit, the demon side of the board sort of did its job. And then an unlucky battle shock roll meant that you lost one of the other Prosecutors out of the unit of 3.
Yeah, they're always useless, those guys. But this game in particular, they had a really horrible game.
Yeah. One of them just ran away when he realized that his mate had just
turned into tentacles and fallen to earth. Yeah, so he ran, which is fair.
So while it wasn't as good as I'd hoped, it was still pretty good. But then your first turn was like really set up the stakes for the game, I think.
Yeah, so I'd set up on my right flank like a trio of heroes. Stormcast heroes are quite good. When they're all together, they're actually surprisingly good, and they're actually part of a battalion of formation that gives them a little kind of attack if they're within 3 inches of each other, which turned out to be completely useless for the entire game. But simply having them there and the artifacts they're equipped with made them quite a good threat. So my Lord Veritant, who's just gone to task on your army whenever he's been involved, he had a Blessed Sword, which is an artifact, one of the new artifacts from Stormcast book, that gives him +1 attack, unless he's fighting Chaos, in which case it's +2 attacks. So it only has 6 attacks, and he is actually one of the best close combat heroes in terms of his attack. He's got 2 damage on his sword, rend 1, which is an armor save modifier. So I wanted to turn him into a kind of super hero threat, almost an equivalent of my Celestin on that flank. And then my Celestin could sit behind this building and peel either left or right, depending on how fortunes were going. So that was all set up quite nicely. I was able to push forward with the Liberators and kind of engage. And then on the very first turn in my movement phase, I rolled 3+ for both of my Celestial Realm units. So the Fulminators came down and the Retributors came down. And I just placed them behind Chris's army, behind his bundle of important stuff, his Zangor, his General, his Gaunt Summoner. And then they had to charge, and they deploy 9 inches away, have to deploy 9 inches away. So you're looking for a 9+ on roll 2 dice. They both failed their charges. Yeah. Which is statistically, it's a hard
I was relying on that happening. I think if you made that charge, the game almost would have been over.
It would have been tough, especially, the Gaunt Summoner would have been gone.
Particularly because the Vortex didn't come off, which is one of those kind of crucial...
Which is why I wanted to do it, really. So, the Vortex came up later. I tried to dispel it, but couldn't. I knew how important it was. But they were there, and they were suddenly miles away from the action because they'd failed their charge roll. I'd taken this gamble on A, that they could make the charge, and B, failing that, I might get a double turn, in which case they could just move in and charge anyway. So I thought, okay, that's game over if that happens for Chris. So it's probably worth this gamble.
Yeah.
And didn't quite come off, but it put the game into a really interesting place from that moment onwards.
There was a few crazy things. So that turn, the fucking horn man.
Oh yeah.
Again, the Heralder does the thing Heralds in every game we've played. Blew up a big stone chair by honking his big horn at it. And that killed a Zangor.
Yeah.
And then I rolled a 6 on the Battleshock chest, which caused a further 2 Zangors to run away.
Unlucky. Like they were terrified of this chair that just blew up.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of my hench birdmen, ran away.
Yeah, put a wound or 2 on your, Thaumaturge Minotaur.
Yeah.
I think it hurt your
general as well.
Your general as well. Yeah, that was a good toot.
Terrified of that ability.
It's amazing.
His ability to blow up scenery is terrifying.
Yeah, it's really good.
But one thing that was really interesting about this is that, like, at this point, it felt like we both had loads riding on the turn roll. Like, maybe it would have been a better idea not to expose myself to that danger, but
I think it was right to take that round of shooting, being as your army is so geared around that.
Yeah.
You have to get as many rounds of shooting as you can.
But still, it felt very cagey, because I knew that if I lost this turn roll, then you would just flatten me.
Yeah.
Completely.
It would have been bad.
It would have been bad. Luckily I didn't. And that sort of opened the game up, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
For us having another turn and a half Tom Smasher.
Hammer.
Yeah. And what that allowed me to do is to get the vortex off, which, because you can't enter within 3 inches of the vortex, creates a bottleneck, to move the rest of my army out of the way of, and like also use the sort of punt ability of the vortex to shunt things out of the charge range of the fulminators.
Yeah.
And then what that allowed me to do in the sort of subsequent turn of shooting was do a load of damage on the demon flank, basically, wipe out the liberators, wipe out the prosecutors, and start moving up towards the rest.
Yes.
And then the other flank kind of create this big tar pit with the pink horrors. The acolytes didn't last long, but also move the thaumaturge up and the Zangor. Thaumaturge finally did the thing he's supposed to do, which is charge people as a big bull man might.
Yes.
Killed the Veritant, which was satisfying because he's often a pain in the arse.
Yeah, he did. The Veritant did take out most of that.
Yeah, the Veritant killed 6 Carrick acolytes by himself.
He did. Yeah, he's supposed to be like your kind of anti-mage, but he's pretty good in combat.
Yeah, he is. And then sort of at this point, I guess for me, like a plan had formed, which is that like I just have to get the demon flank through and slow you down with everything else. Because if I can get that through, I can get 3 units through and ultimately get a minor victory or something like that. And then I guess I'm trying to think what followed for you on your following turn. I think the following turn for you is when the Fulminators managed to get in to charge the Zangor.
Yes, they moved up there quite quick, actually. I think they're about 10 inches move. And they made their charge. So they went into the back of the Zangor and basically just absolutely trampled them, which is what they're really good at. It's what they reliably do. The Retributors had to move around a big chair and very slowly make their way towards the pink horrors. I tried to use a prayer. Like I had a plan where I wanted to use a prayer called electric chariot or something like that. Lightning chariot. So our chariot of lightning ferries a unit or an individual across the battlefield 24 inches. So I wanted to, I tried to lightning chariot my Heraldo, the horn guy, and I wanted to lightning chariot him over to the Retributors so that he could blow his horn at them to encourage them to move faster. But he failed that. Pretty much all the prayers I attempted, I failed. So the Veritant, who had like a blessed sword, he had a prayer which would let him bless weapons. So I wanted to bless his own weapons. So every 6 he rolled, he'd get another attack. And he failed to do that just throughout the entire game as well. So Sigmar answered no prayers. He was just like, look, get on with it. I don't have time to be buffing your weapons. Just be doing your stuff. So that flank was going really, really well, especially when the Fulminators are in the mix. They're just really, really good. They're really, really tough. There's nothing in the flank that could really hurt them. But everything was miles and miles away from the demon flank. And things were going horribly wrong on the demon flank. Everyone was on fire. The flamers were there. They were taking out loads of Stormcast. The the screamers were screaming. People were just being turned into tentacles all the time.
Yeah.
And it was really, really grim. So, I YOLO'd my general into it to save the day, or try to at least.
He had a proper "you shall not pass" moment of charging into the front of all the demons.
You just right in the middle.
At which point the Dracoth did what?
So the Dracoth, he's got a lightning, attack ability. It's like a breath attack. You pick a point on the battlefield, and everything within 2 inches of that has a chance of taking, mortal wounds. Unless you roll like I did, in which case, the Dracoth,
3 ones in a row.
yeah. And the Dracoth just basically throws up on his feet. And
then the
embarrassed.
thing after that, your Night Venator's Star Eagle just did nothing as well. And just smacked into a nearby piece of scenery.
Yeah, my Venator failed to hit anything, and then his Star Eagle, who was following up, must have, I don't know, crashed into my Dracoth or something. It was just an absolute disaster. So all I needed to do was take 2 of those units out, and the weak links there were the Flamers.
And the Herald.
Who is always quite easy to shoot off in my experience, unless you roll loads of ones. So my shooting just wasn't happening on that flank. Like, in my first round of shooting, I was hoping to take, do more damage to the Herald, do more damage to the Flamers, and it just wasn't happening. So it was actually, I was like, pretty sure I could lose this.
Yeah.
Because I was down to 1 Judicator Prime who heroically withstood.
Not even yet. Like, this was
before
that. So, so you have the 1 Judicator Prime left, engaging the Screamers.
Yeah.
And then my Flamers and Pink Horrors and Herald facing the Lord Celestin.
Yes.
Celestin kills my Herald, as it will be expected to do.
Yes, it really should do that.
Charging the Pink Horrors, and then I knew at this point, this was going into the 3rd turn, that a double turn could really hurt me, and luckily, it didn't happen again. I got the turn roll again. And I knew at this point that the poor Thaumaturge, who at this point was fighting everybody by himself, killed the Heralder as well, but that whole flank is a lost cause, really. I had to just get through your Celestin, get through your Judicator Prime, outrun the Venator, and get 3 units off the board on that side. So through using both of the Summoner's spells, I managed to do a bunch of wounds. I managed to get the Lord Celestin to 4 wounds. At which point the Pink Horrors on that flank cast Unchecked Mutation on him, which managed to do 3 mortal wounds with a chance. And then it was one of those situations where if I roll a 5 or a 6, it does 1 more mortal wound.
Oh, yeah.
And I managed to get the 5, which meant that he took his full 4 wounds, and the Pink Horrors managed to magic the Lord Celestin off the board, turning him into tentacles.
Yeah.
Which means another tick in the box of the 999 times I need to play the Music of Zinch to him.
I've only just remembered that my mounts now for the Stormcast have their own special abilities, and
should have done mortal wounds.
Should have done more. Well, I had a chance to do some revenge wounds back.
Yeah,
but it doesn't really matter anymore.
There's a whole separate subject of things we forgot.
Yeah,
I forgot that the Thaumaturge should regenerate a wound every turn.
Yes,
so he should have been on full health when he fought
should.
your dudes, and he wasn't.
No.
And I keep forgetting about all the buffs I've got and the synergies. And
there's so much going on.
I remembered more this game than I have previously.
I think the more you play with it, the more you'll just remember the rerolls.
And then I realized that so I need to get obviously through the Judicator Prime, who's in the way. I failed to shoot him off the board with the Flamers and the Pink Horrors and everything else. He just survived all of that.
Pretty extraordinary rolls he made.
He just didn't care. And this is like the 3rd game in a row that Judicator Prime has done whatever the fuck he wants. But then we had the most extraordinary, so at this point, I'm charging you not because I want to charge you, but because I want to move. And if I can make the charge roll, I can move up the board, which gets me closer to the edge. And so my Pink Horrors are about 8 inches away, which is kg on 2 dice. But I get a 10. So the Pink Horrors make it in. They move up to the Judicator Prime. Not enough to get the entire unit into combat, but
they're engaged.
They're in. The Flamers are a full foot away. They have a 10-inch flying move, but I want that move. So I'm just going to do this as a Hail Mary. At which point I rolled 2 6s.
It was pretty extraordinary. Yeah, that's photograph that moment.
Yeah. I did a little victory lap of the room.
It was
and actually after Lord Celestin died, you suggested that we call the game, right?
I didn't think I'd be able to get across in time with my Fulminators and my anything else.
So the Flamers move up, and then in the following round of combat, which does see bad things happen in Ogroid Town, the Pink Horrors, the Screamers, and the Flamers all attack 1 Judicator Prime and do not hit him
No, they completely whiff it.
Yeah. Well, he saves everything.
He does. He's 4+ save.
Yeah.
Went really well for him. He was amazing. He was the hero of the game.
He was. So this one Judicate Prime holds up this entire demonic tide that's rolling towards.
He's got a knife. He's just got a dagger. Yeah. And a bow. That's all he's got. He doesn't have a proper hammer.
And then led to your following turn.
Yes.
So the Judicator Prime shoots into combat into the flamers. Did you roll? So he does 6? He does D6 wounds, right?
He does, yeah. So once he's hit on a 2+, by the way, because he's the Prime, you roll D6 wound rolls, and I rolled a 6 for that. So then I was rolling 6 wounds. I think all of them hit.
Yeah.
So that was 6 wounds on that unit.
It wasn't quite enough to kill all of the flamers, but you got them down really, really low.
Yeah, he just point blank shot them with his electric arrow, which is a pretty fucking badass move on his part. I mean, well, what a guy.
And then the remaining flamer was assassinated by that eagle who figured its shit out.
The eagle picked itself up, redeemed itself in my eyes.
Yeah.
He'll be allowed back.
And that put me in a really risky position because then I've only got 2 units on that flank.
That's the thing. And that was the magic thing of just taking it down to 2 units. Then it doesn't matter what happens on that flank. That's done then, really. Yeah. I still rushed my 4 minutes across just in case but it was mostly because the other flank was fine because the Retributors had finally arrived. Yeah. And they were going to take care of fucking everything, which is what
they did.
Which they did.
Yeah. The Retributors completely cleaned house of the Pink Horrors. And then, yeah, I mean, we did make a slight mistake in that your Fulminators ran in charge, but it would have made an ultimate difference.
Yeah, it was 2 inches in it. I think they didn't roll a long run. And plus they eradicated a group of Pink Horrors that would have been inconsequential. Yeah. Because it would have just been 2 units.
And at that point, it was such an interesting swing because you were racing to catch up, but as soon as because the other thing is that I had a really good series of Destiny dice rolls, and I had the ability to regenerate Destiny dice, and I had a shitload of 1s in my Destiny pool. Yeah. Which would be useless normally, but is amazing because if you get a 1 result for a Battlestruck test on Pink Horrors, they come back. Right. And so I could just keep doing that. So I knew that I had infinite Pink Horrors as long as you didn't kill the entire unit in 1 turn.
Yeah. But that happens
then
sometimes.
You did.
Yeah, that's what Retributors do and that's what Fulminators do. I mean, I love those units. The Stormcast Big Shock units, they really reliably do what they should do according to the fiction. They're there to clean house. Yeah. When there's
the reason we call them the Retributor bus.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They're the thing that, the opponent always has to worry about and always has to think about because they're just these badass units.
Yeah. And so at that point it had to be called because I had, I only had 2 units left on the board at that point, but one of them was a Gaunt Summoner on a Bellwind Vortex. Yeah. Who would have had to have run through your entire army to get to the edge of the board. So yeah, the library you were protecting beyond the edge of the board was safe again.
Well, safe, but maybe that's how each one.
My defeated streak is maintained.
It is,
despite looking like I was going to win for about a minute.
Could have been the first time. It was so close. I forgot how slow your army is. I think
apart from the things that are fast, that's the thing.
That's right. So the screamers are good. They're always going to go off. But if you'd have had a load of Skyfires on the board, you could have just flown them over my army and it'd been quite hard to stop. So a lot of that's dependent on the makeup of your army. And because it was a scenario all about maneuvering, about fast movement particularly, it was pretty tough for you to break through the lines.
But it was also, there were so many rolls in that game, dice rolls that felt key. Like all of the turn rolls.
Yeah, they
felt
all
really important.
For sure. Yeah.
But equally, things like the daft charge on my, I think your Celestin whiffing all of those attacks. It's very hard to say who the dice favored in that game.
It went both ways, I think. Yeah. But it made for a really unpredictable and interesting, story for sure.
Yeah. And it fits into the ongoing narrative of those 2 armies as well. Because even though I lost again, the kind of story of escalation feels like it applies there because your Celestin died again.
Again. Yeah. He's been reforged so many times now.
But also, that sense of escalation, this was close. You know what I mean? They've had 2 confident victories in a row now. Yeah. This one almost got past them.
Yeah. It's the one that could be the turning point.
Yeah, ish. We'll find out what that's like eventually.
Yeah. It's coming though. I mean, the more it's staved off, the more it's going to happen eventually.
Indeed. Cool. Shall we do some questions?
Let's do it.
Questions from Miniatures Questions.
Thank you for sending us your questions, everybody.
Yeah, we've had loads of really good questions.
It's been awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been great.
Thank you for your response.
Yeah, thank you for your feedback as well. Which we asked for after the last episode. It's been very, very heartening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any feedback you have, continue to tell us. Honk at us.
Honk.
Tell us how to do it better.
I just honked anyway.
Lovely.
Great. Fantastic. So first up, Alex writes, "Hey Chris and Tom, not really a question. I just wanted to write in and say that I enjoyed the first episode. That's good to know." And then he tells an amazing story, which is as follows. "Having recently rediscovered the particular zen pleasure of miniatures painting, I found it touching to hear you tell your own stories. For me, the breaking point was during a period a year or so ago when I allowed my research to follow me home. I'd taken the gamble of trying to use the tools of deep learning in my own field of neutrino physics and decided that it was a good idea to take advantage of the only accelerated computing I had access to, my gaming GPU. For some months, not only did I have no access to my gaming machine, but it would also be running one prototype network or another, its constant rumbling a reminder of the gamble I had taken with my academic career. Deprived of digital respite, and driven by some deep instinct, I found myself buying, constructing, and painting the Infinity starter set. For the first time in over a decade, I started to dabble in artistic endeavour, and it brought me total peace and joy at a time when I was genuinely having trouble sleeping. Anyhow, keep up the podding, Alex. P.S. The science worked out great. It turns out neural networks are just as excellent at electrons and muons as they are at cat pictures."
What an amazing story.
That's an amazing one-upping of our
Yeah,
version of
definitely.
we weren't sure how to handle all of the computer games anymore, so we started buying plastic men.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm an actual
Doing real
physicist.
science.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. Next up, Stuart writes, "Dear Crummy Cream Cakes," definitely inheriting a
Crate and Crowbar thing there.
Crate and Crowbar pod question format. As a long-term listener, jaded PC gamer, and toy soldier colouring in fetishist, the podcast Cosmic Realms have aligned exactly with my interests to create the realm of podding. I'm not really an Age of Sigmar player, although I played a lot of Games Workshop stuff in my youth. I mostly do historical tabletop wargaming now, not out of snobbishness, but I think I'm just getting old. At 27, this is a worrying trend, and also additionally from Chris personally. Fuck you, sir. At some point in your late 20s, I think all men wake up and just want to know lots about World War II. Or men in pantaloons with flags. I think that's not really the case for you and I, necessarily.
No, more about the dwarves in flying boats.
Yeah, me too, to be fair. I don't know what part of World War II they fit into.
The good part.
Anyway, just wanted to say I'm looking forward to the next episode. Your explanation of Age of Sigmar and its various cosmic doodads is probably the most coherent version I've heard, which is saying something.
Goodness me, oh, yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's difficult to bring the topic up around these parts without ex-fantasy battle players foaming at the mouth and shaking violently. I wonder what your thoughts are on how the old fantasy factions fit into the Sigmar narrative, which I think works perfectly for the chaos weird men versus shiny armor good men type of games you've been playing. I think it's less clear how the other factions fit into the new high fantasy setting, given that they're still firmly rooted, aesthetically at least, in the Tolkien-esque low fantasy old world. Regards, Stuart.
Good question. I think death fits in really well with this, because the whole premise of the whole thing about Age of Sigmar is that it's essentially a war for souls, ultimately.
Yeah.
And control of souls as a resource, both from Sigmar's perspective and from Chaos's perspective. And the gash and death as, the most seasoned, it defines them. The idea of souls and being this malleable, useful resource, like that's what they're all about. And I think you can keep hordes of skeletons, you can keep vampires, make them even more flamboyant. And I think that stuff slots in quite well with the setting and these themes.
I think the issue is less with there is space for low fantasy ordinary people in the Age of Sigmar setting perfectly reasonably. Like you can have regular people forming militias to fight impossible monsters, and that makes for perfectly good storytelling.
Yeah.
The reason where they struggle, I think, to make stuff cohere is because so much of the old Warhammer Fantasy battle stuff was taken not just from Tolkien, but from history and mythology more generally.
Right.
Like, Bretonnians are Arthurian knights.
Yeah,
That's what they are. Like, Sigmar has decided, the Age of Sigmar has tried to make stuff its own, whereas the Bretonnians are always going to be Lady of the Lake, Lancelot, the Green Knight. Yeah. Like, there is very little getting around that. Similarly, the Empire is always going to be Holy Roman Empire, Renaissance era soldiery. Freelancers and knights and things. And that's, again, hard to get around because it's specifically rooted in real history. They're doing what they can, I think, which is to establish that there are factions where those units can fit, but it still doesn't look quite right. And I think that's something to be dealt with over time.
Yeah, I think some of them work, like Flagellants and the old kind of Sigmar cultists work really, really well in the new setting, because you could see them actually being the ordinary citizens of the realms. they could go that way. They're not likely to form, gun lines and musket militias, but they are likely to form this kind of ragtag skirmish bands.
Yeah.
So that stuff fits very, very nicely. You're right about Bretonia, though. I can't see any way of them fitting that. I mean, it's weird having horses in Age of Sigmar. The mounts are just crazy, and just having a normal horse with a man on it it's almost underwhelming in that fantasy, isn't it?
Mm. I think, it's all of the stuff that draws specifically not just from the old world, but from the real world is the problem. Mm. It's the reason that, I suspect the reason they deprecated Bretonia and Tomb Kings is because Tomb Kings are Egyptian undead, and Bretonia are, it's Arthurian legend. It's by way of Mallory, and, it's explicitly...
Yeah, it's rooted in our world.
Yeah, absolutely 100% rooted in our world.
Yeah.
And it's because, honestly, to be, balanced about this, it's because the Warhammer Fantasy traditionally was about cribbing from mythology, history, and Tolkien to populate our world.
Yeah.
With little smatterings of originality in there. Like the Lizardmen are original, Skaven are relatively original, but there's a lot about it that's just stuff from other things turned into a kind of, patchwork quilt of ideas. And there's lots of love about that. But I can also respect the desire to move away from it towards stuff that's more wholly owned by the creative teams making it.
Yeah, I can see why people would miss it.
Yeah, totally.
But other fantasy battle games are available.
Indeed, yeah. On the Tomb Kings thing, actually, I wanted to mention that if you miss that particular deprecated faction, then the fan-made Tomb Kings Battle Tome came out last week.
It did, yeah.
Which is made by a guy called Tyler Mengel, who does Mengel Miniatures, which is a very good fan site.
Yeah.
Brown seems like a solid dude.
Great painter as well.
Yeah, a very, very good painter. And in very minor personal news, there's also a associated book of lore and short stories set in the setting that he's come up with, coming out relatively soon, for which I have done writing.
Really?
So, you can find some chaos-related Tomb Kings fiction.
Nice.
In that. I don't know when exactly that's coming out, but
I think the Tomb Kings fit in more than many of the other kind of legacy factions that have been sidelined a little bit.
Yes, they do. But nonetheless, I think...
They ride giant snakes.
Yeah, I think it's more that their associations are... I think they do fit. I think they do fit really well. It's just...
You can see why they...
The thread they seemed to move along was
Yeah.
which factions have the most explicit relationship with world mythology. That's one... It's actually more of a guess than anything else, but yeah.
Seems that way.
Tomb Kings are way easier to reconcile the Age of Sigmar setting than Bretonians are.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And in any case, Tyler Mengel has done that very successfully. So,
exactly.
Nonetheless. Ben writes, "Hey there, meeples and miniatures. Firstly, I'd like to say how much I enjoyed your first episode. Thank you very much. My question for the show is, you mentioned how playing X-Wing had sparked your interest for more tabletop gaming in the form of AOS. So are there any other miniatures games out there that, if given the opportunity, you'd like to play? For example, Halo Fleet Battles, Malifaux, or some other system? Looking forward to the next episode. Ben."
Our Discord's been talking a lot about a samurai miniatures game that looks quite cool.
Yeah.
Because I like samurai, and the idea of painting little samurai miniatures tickles my fancy.
While I was at that regional, I mentioned that X-Wing regional, I went for a wander around the other sections, and Drop Fleet Commander has a bit of a appeal to me, which is a sort of in-atmosphere capital ship, starship combat game with cool looking miniatures, but I've got enough projects.
Yeah.
I have enough
true.
projects.
Yeah, we've got our hands full with Games Workshop. I'll keep an eye out for the other stuff though, because I'm interested in kind of different aesthetics, different ways of modelling, because Games Workshop obviously have their own, they're very, very good at what they do, but they have their own sensibilities, and I'm kind of interested to see what other companies would do.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think I want to be, it was really easy to take on loads of extra projects when I was moving through the stuff I was doing at such a clip. Like, I had a very productive second half of last year.
Yeah.
But this break that I've sort of enforced break that I've been on means that I want to just get through the stuff I've got. And I might not buy another model for a couple of months, really, like at any scale, because I want to get that stuff done. Yeah, I'll make an exception for Shadespire. That's where I'd make an exception.
That sounded, I don't know, it sounds like it's going to be later this year. So maybe like late in the year rather than just summer.
In which case, hopefully I'll be done with Birdmen by then.
Else,
yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, there's plenty of games I'd like to try. It's also a realistic question of time. There's the old problem of like, you play every board game you own really once.
Yeah.
And like, we're getting games of Age of Sigmar in, but it still takes a while to set them up. We're still working through Silver Tower, which means no demand for the new Warhammer quest.
Yes,
like,
that's true.
One thing at a time.
Yes.
Although I would be interested in trying some new stuff, so, we shall see. I'll tell you what, actually, the other thing that would maybe pull me in a different direction, but again, it's Games Workshop, is the new version of Adeptus Titanicus, which is the kind of
the new
Titan battle game.
That's pretty cool.
I like big mechs.
Titans are awesome.
I cannot lie. Mike writes, hello, and he also goes on to say, apologies in advance for the potentially lengthy question. We'll find out. I started collecting Warhammer Fantasy and 40k at a relatively young age due to the influence of my older brothers, and like most people, as you pointed out, fell out of the hobby in my teens. However, I was never really able to fully extricate from Games Workshop influence. I played Dawn of War, Blood Bowl, etc. on PC, read some of the novels, had friends keeping me up to date with the lore and new releases, and I even played the odd Mordheim campaign with Tom, as a matter of fact, apparently.
Well.
So I don't think I wrote this guy's surname down. So I just dropped this on you. Like,
what?
It's like, this is your life.
It's like a ghost has come through the wall and.
Yeah. Recently, though, I've been feeling a pull back in, as if being sucked inexorably slowly down into a whirlpool with physical games such as Silver Tower and the slightly further removed Warhammer Quest card game. For a number of reasons, partly due to wanting to paint my Silver Tower models and partly due to hearing people such as yourselves talking enthusiastically about the hobby, I've been considering not just taking the plunge, but I'm stuck wondering how I should go about it. I know Tom said he went the traditional route of picking up the AOS starter pack, but what about Chris? Were either of you able to surface some of your old models and put them to use, or did you have to start from scratch? Similarly, with things like paints and brushes and terrain, is this going to be a massive investment all over again? Any tips and tricks you could share would be most welcome. Keep up the good pods, Mike. So, yeah, because we covered the fact that, I suppose we never covered where my stuff came from, but like, so my Scene Charming explicitly started with the Silver Tower box, right? Like, I can't use all of it, but like, I added a couple of boxes of Pink Horrors, I added, some more hero models, Demons, Flamers, and Screamers, but like, it started with that box, which is where my Gaunt Summoner and, Ogre Thaumaturge came from.
Yes.
The good thing about AOS is because the rules are free, whatever models you have, you can use.
Yeah. I think, in terms of like repurposing, old stuff, almost all of it can be repurposed. And if you want to just sort of start playing, you don't even really need to put them around bases because, the bases are.
Yeah, you can fudge it. It's fine.
Yeah, just use the rule set. I'd like the idea of, what's it called? Dark Age of Sigmar.
The sort of Inquisitor 28 format kind of thing. Yeah.
Which is a kind of fan-made skew on Age of Sigmar, which is about like grimdark take on it with warbands that are kind of, almost like AOS via 40k, but I think a lot of existing Mordheim warbands would fit really well into that setting.
Yeah.
If you wanted to play that way. And also it's a good way of just building up a small force and playing with the rule set that way, rather than having to invest in a huge army. Yeah. So that's a really cool, fan-led initiative.
Yeah, it's led by a guy who goes by Ex Profundis on Twitter, who's...
Yeah, really worth following on Twitter.
Yeah, who's painting and sort of, and fiction writing around his models, fills me with profound jealousy in a good way.
Yeah, it's
in
great.
A very good way. And I think it's been coordinated through the Grand Alliance forums as well. So we can put some links to that sort of thing in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can dig out your Mordheim models and they'll slot right in, I think.
Yeah. Although that's, I think that's maybe slightly deep end in terms of reinvesting in Age of Sigmar. Like, what you want to get in is you can just play straight away with whatever you've got.
Sure.
There's no need to kind of, because that sort of thing is also partly about a kind of aesthetic,
I love
craft project.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's quite hobby focused, that one actually. But yeah, you can just buy anything really. Like the starter collecting boxes are mostly good, I would say. Yeah. Particularly the death ones, even though death isn't as well supported in the rules yet with new battle tomes or whatever. The start collecting death stuff gives you some just fucking amazing models. Yeah. Like the, not the Coven Throne, it's like it's like an altar on, just a sea of, ghost horses. That's a huge model you just get to paint straight out of the start collecting box, and you'll get some cool knights and some skellies. Yeah. So there's lots of really so yes, you can use your original stuff. I didn't use any of my old stuff, even though I rescued it from my parents' house because I really couldn't paint for shit when I was a teenager. But nonetheless,
But yeah, the stock collecting box is a good place to start. Terrain is nice to have, but when you start playing, it's not essential. And like, also, there's very likely to be somewhere you can go in your area to play a game where they'll have their own terrain.
Yeah, definitely.
Whether that's your Games Workshop or somewhere else. So I'd say that's strictly optional. Like paints, brushes, that's an expense. I use Army painter brushes, which are relatively cheap, but I use Games Workshop paints, which are not.
Yes.
So, you know, that's
going to be a bigger expense than your Army.
Yeah.
Than your first boxes, I'd say.
It's, you know, there's no getting around that kind of initial investment is going to be in the triple digits rather than the double digits.
Yeah,
mostly.
basically.
If you want to get like a start collecting box and enough paints to do them justice, you'd probably be shy of £100, but not very far shy of £100.
Yeah.
So, that's the kind of investment you're thinking of. The way I think about it, it is an expensive beginning. The way I think about it is, one, you'll get used to those paints for a while, but two, I think I heard it put this way well on the Mortal Realms podcast, but the cost of a model is partly the time you're painting it as well.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just pounds per, you know, gram of plastic. It's each model represents a certain amount of time that you should be enjoying painting it. Because if you don't enjoy painting, if it's just a chore to you, then I don't.
Yeah.
Probably.
What are you doing?
Yeah. So that's the way I think of it as well. Like, you know, Lord of Change is an expensive model, but I'm looking forward to not only owning that model, but the process of assembling it is going to make me feel good about stuff, which is the point.
Yeah. That's a good point.
But yeah, nonetheless, it is expensive. So yeah, I think in terms of the order of things that you list as being sort of concerned about the cost of, yes to using old models. New models are a ways of getting them relatively cheap. Paints and brushes are expensive. Terrain, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. And I know who Mike is now.
Yeah.
I figured it out.
Okay. Fienya, who's one of my old Dota pals.
Yeah.
So we're doing the full lap.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
All our old friends.
They're all coming out of the walls. Hi, miniature resin crate and converted crowbar. Firstly, loving the pod. It's something I'm now going to be anticipating every month while trying to find a miniatures pod to listen to for a while. Oh, hang on, having been. That's nice to hear. My question is, what do you think about playing games with unpainted models? I've come to like it less and less as the years have gone on. I don't want to use a model that doesn't have at least all of its base coats on, a far cry from the legions of grey plastic of my youth. But I know plenty of people who happily use unpainted and sometimes very broken or badly put together models. I suppose it comes down to what your priorities from the hobby are, but why do people do this? Clearly, as podcasters, you must know. Thanks for reading, Fienya. It's interesting that both of us immediately agreed to never use unpainted models without ever having had a conversation about that.
Yeah, I think for both of us, it was so obviously a part of the experience. Like, because we could just you play any games, right? If we wanted to play like a hardcore, interesting competitive game, we go play X-Wing. But we wanted this aesthetic experience of having armies and building the universe and kind of seeing it on the tabletop, which is not going to happen if the models aren't painted. But it depends what you want. If you love pushing them around and being competitive and playing competitively, and they're just kind of game pieces to you, then that's fine too.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's nothing, you know, play your way, but for me, I think the aesthetic part of it is such a huge part of it.
Yeah, for sure. It is, but personally, yeah.
Because also partly, like, putting them together is like the worst bit. You have to assemble them, I guess, right? Like, I mean, I suppose you could write down what the unit is on a base, but like, you know, gluing things together is the most boring part. So if you're going to go through that faff to play a game, go the rest of the way and spend 100 hours painting. Like, I mean, even, you know, we play this, even though Age of Sigmar's our focus, we're both applying this to the Horus Heresy thing. A game we picked up in October and haven't played yet.
Yeah,
because
still painting it.
Yeah, still painting it. Like, it's still, I don't know.
Big part of it. I mean, it's for me anyway. I do agree. I understand why people will go down to a game club and they just want to, you know, road test a new army and they don't necessarily have everything quite up to scratch yet. But there are degrees of formality to the way people play the game. So I think we tend to just make a day of it and kind of bring everything painted. So there's a degree of formality in a way of just kind of, you know, we're going to make this experience for ourselves. Whereas for some people who go down to a game club every week, and it's just their Tuesday night every week, just turning up in that context with some unpainted stuff that you just want to try out is just, you know, seems fine as well.
Yeah, I get that. I think maybe because my X-Wing has got my kind of competitive need filled so resolutely.
Yeah.
I would be less competitive with Age of Sigmar anyway. But like, that really doesn't interest me. Like, I want the experience of putting the models down. And it was nice, like, when we went to playing Games Workshop and like people noticed because a lot of the people there were like playing with unpainted models, and you know, it's not why you do it, but it's a nice feeling to the performative aspect of it, being able to lay out all that painted stuff. That said, I do totally get the urge to play. Like, something that I thought was a really nice solution was, Silver Tower, which is a game I really love, struck me as a really strange proposition, for some ways. Like, it's a great introduction to that world. It's a fun, cooperative dungeon crawler game set in the Age of Sigmar that is a great entry point for people. And, you know, we're playing it with, you know, Pip and our friend Matt, both of whom don't play Warhammer in any other context, and it's a way for them to get into it. However, the painting and assembly challenge for Silver Tower is huge. Like, they're complicated models. They're going to take 1,000,000 years to paint. And given that it's also, you know, it's a valid offering to the board game community, yet with a degree of assembly and craft hobby stuff required in setting it up that is vastly in excess of any equivalent board game, which is, you know, a strange double identity for the game. But one solution I saw that I really liked was, I think it was someone on Board Game Geek got a can of gold spray paint and a can of silver spray paint and sprayed all of the villains silver and all of the heroes gold and left it at that.
Just game pieces,
And they're game pieces.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it works perfectly well. And it actually looks pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, you know, especially like if you're kind of trying to factor in time investment relative to, you know, so I spent the same amount of time assembling the models as that person did, but I spent easily, you know, probably 50 times longer, if not more,
getting them up to
painting them.
Standard,
And so, you know, mine look better, but only because of vast time investment of months rather than like probably most of a day it would take to do the rest of them properly. Like, that's, you know, a crazy difference, and they look pretty good and were perfectly serviceable for the purpose that they're required for in terms of playing a fun game with your friends.
Yeah.
So that I can kind of get behind. I think I really hate the look of grey plastic. I think it's something about grey specifically. Like, you know, we were saying this earlier, but with the Shadespire stuff where they're releasing snap fit models that are in bright red plastic and bright blue plastic, even that is better to me. There's just something about the roughness of grey plastic, particularly when you can see the kind of the grotty bits of plastic glue that are still hanging off something. That's what really I find kind of like, just don't want to have to look at that.
Get off my table.
Exactly. Don't know why I'm becoming weirdly hardcore about this.
I think it's because we enjoy the painting so much. I mean, it's, if you're going to go to an official AOS tournament, your stuff's got to be painted.
Yeah.
That is, as far as GW are concerned, that's an important part of the hobby. Almost an entry, you know, it's got to be to a certain, you know, degree of effort must have gone into actually presenting the models.
Yeah. Which is a strange thing in a competitive context, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
That is the nature of the hobby.
I kind of agree with it.
Russell writes, he has 2 questions. A. Tom, when doing your 2 base coats of gold, do you spray gold and then brush over that, or do you do 2 layers with a brush? I have a lot of little men sprayed gold waiting for my attention.
I don't actually spray undercoat my guys gold, which is possibly a stupid move on my part, being as they are like 90% gold. So
I can lend you my gold spray when I'm done.
Yeah, maybe I'll try some. So spray, the trouble is, it's very hard to paint a lot of matte colours onto gold after the fact.
I've discovered this.
Chris has discovered. So getting a lot of blue and stuff onto the gold afterwards, I'd rather build up the gold from the grey undercoat I use, which is like I think it's not, it's the one you use, Chris, is an Army Painter one, is it?
Yeah, Army Painter Uniform Grey is my base paint of choice.
Which I like because it doesn't, because all acrylics are transparent and they all kind of take on the properties to the extent of what's underneath them, even if it's a base coat. And grey doesn't kind of warp the colour much at all. So the gold stays at the kind of tone of gold it's supposed to be. Whereas I found previously that painting gold over white gives it just an almost kind of a very unrealistic hue, which maybe is because I've not done it right. But, so yeah, I paint, Retributor armour base over grey and 2 thin coats of that. Sometimes 1 will do, depends. And then
depends how the Retributor armor gold is feeling that day.
It really does. That paint, you don't know what it's going to do really. And then Reichen Flesh Aid, then Auric armor, a couple of coats of that. Be thin and repetitive with Auric armor, because the more you build that stuff up, the shinier your stuff's going to be eventually. And then edge highlights with their kind of I can't remember what their gold highlight colour is called, but they've got one. And then edge highlights in extreme parts with Stormhost Silver or Runefence Steel, which is basically just still silver. So the very brightest parts of the gold should be that. That is how the Stormcast do. That's like 90% of them.
That's how you gold, man.
And they're really satisfying because gold is just looks lovely.
The B question is, at risk of driving yourselves and the listeners mad, given Tzeentch needs mortal civilization to draw power, what might its endgame be, or is it too inscrutable for our puny minds to comprehend? Looking forward to the next episode. Russell from Australia and Discord. So this is in relation to the whole Tzeentch kind of naturally taking precedence in the fiction after mortal civilization gets another foothold.
Yeah.
So I think there's an element of too inscrutable / woolly for you to comprehend.
Yes, definitely.
But Tzeentch's focus is always traditionally on the great game, which is the kind of competition to the death between the Chaos Gods, possibly more so than the other gods. Tzeentch is concerned with winning the great game. So ultimately it's less about screwing over mortals so much as being in a position to use mortals and mortal civilization to finally properly, fully subdue Khorne and Nurgle and Slaanesh.
Yeah, I guess from Tzeentch's perspective, it's about having more pieces on the board.
Yeah.
That can actually do stuff and that can actually work his spirit of change through. Whereas if you've got a dead desert, Tzeentch isn't going to be able to, where are the machinations? Where are the lies? Where's the betrayal in a desert full of nothing?
Indeed. Well, you can find out a little bit more about that in the fiction tie-in to the Endless Deserts Battle.
Nice.
But yeah, nonetheless, so Tzeentch I think is more is the most anti-chaos of the Chaos Gods in a weird way, even though it is also the most chaotic of the Chaos Gods. Is beholden to fewer rules really, because changes change, but is also the most concerned with winning the great game. So I think that's always the kind of way it goes. Getting one over on Sigmar is nice, but it's probably nice because you can use it to screw over Khorne.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's the way I always think about it anyway. I really like the older interpretations of the Chaos Gods where they're all, they're all, sort of complementary and contradictory forces as well as beings with willpower and ambition and goals.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Cool.
Very cool. I like Tzeentch.
I like Tzeentch a lot as well, as you might be able to tell from all my stuff. Finally, Ryan writes, Dear CNC, as a kid I got pretty into Battletech / MechWarrior source books and scenarios, so I never really bothered to play it. I wondered if you had any experience with it or thoughts if you haven't played it recently. And then he has another question, but to answer that first bit, my answer is, I love the MechWarrior games, but I have no thoughts on it otherwise.
No, same here. Again, I've just played the games, but not played the video games, but nothing else.
None of the tabletop stuff.
No.
Although actually, like I say, I want Adeptus Titanicus back partly because I want games about assembling mech suits and making them fight. So
nice.
I would be into that. As to a specific question, how do you feel about tabletop systems with a higher degree of granularity versus ones that are more streamlined and generalized? I remember the Battletech rule set as being very specific and complex down to modeling individual systems and body parts on every giant robot. This might be why the only game of it I ever participated in petered out halfway through and never found its way back to the table. On the other hand, I think the complexity of it is part of what made it interesting to begin with. Is there a sweet spot between speed and detail? Are there systems that manage both? Thanks, Ryan.
I think speed is very important when you're actually physically standing somewhere with someone having to get through a thing. The faster and easier it is, the better, just as a social occasion, I think, to have more stuff happening. For the really tight, complicated stuff, really, really granular stuff, video games exist and they do those calculations in milliseconds.
Yeah, simulators feel like almost like military simulators seem like in some senses the inheritor of part of what highly granular tabletop military games were originally setting out to do. Yeah. Especially because they allow you to do that stuff in a single player context against AI where you don't have to find another human being with exactly your patience for intensely granular rules.
Yeah, I think it's, obviously it's cool if you're with an opponent who has the same degree of patience and investment in that, the kind of realism of the scenario. But I wouldn't take that for granted. So given that, fluid rule sets that let you just get on with things. For me, that's what board games, tabletop games should be.
I think as well, like, when you're simulating something real, I can understand the desire to go into depth to really fully get to every aspect of a real experience. However, when you're talking about a fictional thing like sci-fi or fantasy battle, your imagination can fill in a lot of the gaps based on simpler rules. You know, your imagination probably doesn't require there to be rules to account for a glancing blow into the side of a Lehman Russ, right? There is space for that kind of thing. I totally get that. It's not to my taste, but you can, you know, we were talking about it today. We were trying to unpick some of because in some cases, AOS's rules, I would argue, they fit on 4 pages, and in some cases, they might be a little underwritten. Yeah. Not clarifying particular scenarios.
When it goes to moving and piling in and stuff, definitely.
Yeah, so we had this issue with piling in today because we found that when units pile into combat, it means that units charging have almost like a magnetic effect on the units around them, because it gives other units the chance to join that combat, which can effectively, in some scenarios, map to a free move, which was of pointed importance today because of the need for me to get across the table quickly, using combat as a vehicle for that, with some trade-offs, i.e. being in combat, where I don't want to be ever.
Then have to fight.
Yeah, exactly. But, like, we found that we solved that problem partly because we're just thinking about it aesthetically, in terms of what happens when a big man on a dragon charges into a melee with a load of demons. They pile in on him. So even if we weren't playing the rule quite right, or we were having to guess a little bit because the rules weren't completely specific, we did what made sense. And it worked out perfectly well as far as the game was concerned. Yeah, sure. And it didn't require an extra page of rules on, like, secondary pile-ins in this scenario.
With diagrams.
With diagrams to explain granularly how a pink horror should react if a big man is near. Right? Like, we just figured it out. Because it looked right? It looks like, you know, your Celestant has charged into this fight as a kind of last stand maneuver. Of course he gets mobbed by demons. That's kind of right.
That's what we expected.
The rules allow for it. They seem to encourage it. So we went for it. And it didn't require that extra layer of granularity because our imaginations can fill in the rest of the way. And I think that I genuinely prefer that, I think. Because the majority, like, I think there's a tendency in tabletop games of the last, you know, particularly of the big previous generation of tabletop games, to completely overthink rules. And I think the current generation of pen and paper tabletop games, role playing, and now miniatures games and war games are tending towards fewer, broader, more accessible rules.
Yeah, I think it makes the players in part responsible for the experience, as responsible for the experience as the rule designers. And rule designers can't know every type of person and every type of, you know, they can't know what everyone's going to want to get out of the game. So actually bringing in the players as authors of their own experience to that extent, saying just, okay, you figure it out. Actually, we've given you a framework, but it's also on you to make the experience what you want it to be. And that just seems like it circumvents so much frustration and so much kind of rules lawyering by just saying it's on you. Actually, you know, you're a creative part of this as much as the rule designers are. Yeah. So let's share responsibility for having fun.
Yeah. And I completely get behind that. I mean, maybe that has limits when it comes to tournament play.
Yeah, definitely.
But again, the vast majority of the games you play will not be in tournaments. So you want a rule set that is fun to play the rest of the time, because that prevents all the other games you play from simply being practice for looking up things on the big table that tells you whether you won or not. That is all of the questions we have for episode 2 of Miniatures Monthly at the Crate and Crowbar.
Woo. Thank you for your questions, everyone.
Thank you. And if you'd like to send us any questions or feedback for a future episode, you can email us at miniatures@crateandcrowbar.com, which is exciting. I also wanted to say, because I didn't say it at the start of the episode, thank you to Mike Debenham for our amazing intro and soon-to-be outro music. Yeah. Sent to us completely unbidden after we said we were looking for music on the last podcast.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And genuinely phenomenal.
So good.
So we put a link in the show notes to his website. Thank you again, Mike, for sending us that. It's amazing. I've said that now, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Absolutely awesome thing to have done. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, you can follow the Crate and Crowbar generally at Crate and Crowbar. You can also hang out with the Crate and Crowbar community on Discord. The link is on the website at crateandcrowbar.com, and there is a dedicated channel called Table Talk where people like to talk about miniatures and role-playing games. If you would like to follow us as individuals, you can do that. I'm at C Thurston, that's CTHURSTEN. And you are,
At
Tom?
PCG Ludo, which is PCG Ludo.
We also both have Instagrams that we use to share pics and miniatures.
We do, though mine got hacked, so it had to be deleted.
Really?
Yeah, who the fuck
What
hacks
the
some miniatures?
Are you going to do it again?
Yeah, definitely. I'll let you know.
Okay,
I'll
shit.
put
All right, I genuinely thought we had that
Drama.
problem solved.
Who the fuck hacks miniatures Instagram?
I don't know. That's
Yeah.
bizarre.
Yes, very
All right,
strange.
well,
Anyway.
mine is at Exit Warp on Instagram, which is EXITWARP. Finally, Miniatures Monthly and the Crate and Crowbar more broadly is very kindly supported by our Patreon backers at patreon.com/Crate and Crowbar. If you want to check it out, you can find out why we do thing we do, how we pay for thing we do with money that you do. Thank you very much to all of our backers because it's much appreciated and does allow us to do extra fun things like this very miniatures podcast. Indeed. I guess that's it for this month.
See you next month.
See you at the end of April, everybody.
We paint tiny people. We paint tiny people, then we play with